Hi guys, on the Zoom, can somebody turn their microphones on?
Yes, I'm here. Hello.
We're going to start the roll call and then we'll put the YouTube on and start the roll call. Okay? Good afternoon. My name is Gillian Balaban and I am Senior Coordinator Governance Relations at GRI. Welcome to this meeting of the Global Sustainability Standards Board, known by its acronym the GSSB, held on 28 and 28 March 2023. This in-person meeting is being hosted from Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Please note that all public GSSB meetings are being recorded and you can find the audio recording on the GSSB webpage along with high-level summaries of previous GSSB meetings. We are joined today at the meeting by members of the Standards Division from the GRI Secretariat. We will now start a roll call. Anna Nefedova.
Present.
Thank you. Evan Harvey.
Present.
Ganga Charan Sharma.
Present.
Julia Genuardi.
Present.
Thank you. Jennifer Prinsing.
Present.
Joseph Martin.
Present.
Kent Swift.
Present.
Thank you. Laura Dana Carter.
Present.
Thank you. Michelle Vassar.
Present.
Peter Colley.
Present.
Robin Leeson.
Present.
Vincent Kong.
Present.
And GSSB Chair Judy Koseski.
Present.
Thank you, everyone. GSSB member Kim Schumacher will join shortly, and GSSB member Corley LaRue sent her apologies. We're also joined at the meeting today as observers by the incoming GSSB members commencing their term from 1 April 2023. So, Trilandra De Silva.
Present.
Thank you. Galia Tsonkova.
Present.
And new GSSB Vice Chair Jeff Robertson.
Present.
Thank you. The new GSSB Chair Carol Adams sent her apologies. I will now hand over to the Chair Judy Koseski to open the meeting.
Thank you very much, Jill. Welcome, colleagues and new members, particularly joining us today. We have a wonderfully full room here in Amsterdam in real life. We're joined by quite a few members of the Standards Division team, which is wonderful to see. We had a private meeting this morning for a little while. We sort of talked about just a number of external goings on. And this afternoon we have a full slate of matters to discuss, including some approvals in our first sessions. I would like to start by just taking a look at the agenda, which is being shared on the screen at the moment, and for those in the room, you've got it on your sheet in front of you. I think we can probably go straight to our first item, which will be the draft summary of the meeting minutes from the 16th of February. Yeah, shall we go ahead with that? Excuse me. Our custom is to approve matters for approval taken by consensus, and only by exception would we generally institute a vote on these for the benefit of new members. So I would like to ask if there are any objections, edits, concerns, questions that anyone would like to raise about the draft summary from the 16th of February. And hearing none, that is approved. Thank you very much. For the rest of today's meeting, we have a whole handful of topic standards matters to discuss, and then sector standards after a short break. And then finally, general standards updates. But we'll start with the topic standards, and I will hand it over to Bastian and other colleagues from the Standards Division to talk us through the status. And there's a good handful of papers and projects that we're going to be going through here with a couple of approvals as well. So thank you, Bastian.
Thank you, Judy. I think I just wanted to open this sequence of detailed briefings on the project level by saying that we're finally seeing traction with our recruitment efforts. So there's evidence of that in the room, but importantly also evidence in the capacity that we have to drive standards projects. This is changing rapidly, not as rapid as you would want. Hiring is relatively slow still, but we have in the day-to-day just a completely different set of capabilities in the standards division and a much wider set of expertise, colleagues from different walks of life that have come together to drive the standards agenda. And that enables us to present today the most significant, I think, overview of ongoing projects to date, where we are very ambitious following your guidance on the work program, but we've put very many projects on the rails now, and they're at different stages of development. But we would like to take the time today to update you on the status of each of the individual projects. As part of, I think part of it is recognizing the different areas of work that are ongoing. Part of it is creating a level set also between the GSSB members, those that are leaving the GSB, to look at the accomplishments of recent months, but also for the incoming members to see what they're getting themselves into. And generally what we would like to do is to have project managers present on a much more regular basis updates on the running projects. We have devised the processes for this. We know what we're doing across the topic standards and the sector standards and other projects in standard setting, and we want to get into the rhythm to have regular updates on status. I think we'll be looking at a quarterly update, probably with a bit more detailed briefing per project, and we'll feed that into our standards division updates on a regular basis now. We have, for the benefit of the GSB members, all the pictures of the colleagues on screen. You will meet very many of them today as part of our proceedings. But just wanted to also say that I'm quite thrilled to have that level of activity in the standards division, and that we can actually devote all that knowledge and drive of the colleagues to the core business of the GSB, the standard setting. We're in a really good space now, and we will keep adding to the team. If you move just one more, and all the colleagues will come back in different, when you look at the new hires, we're currently at a headcount of 27. If we manage to get all the people in that we have scheduled for hiring, then we'll be approaching the 50 colleagues by the end of the year. That is very, very ambitious, I think I can say, so we are already slightly delayed. But even if we get halfway by the end of the year with that hiring schedule, we will have an unparalleled capacity to move the standard setting agenda. With that, I would like to hand over to the colleagues that will introduce the topic standards. And I think, Elodie, you're going first? Perfect, thank you.
Yes, and thank you.
I'm sorry, can I jump in and ask a quick question?
Yes, go ahead.
Can you hear me okay? What do you think changed? What was the most successful change in recruiting that you have seen? And I'm excited to see so many new people joining.
I think it's two things. One is we're leveraging just different financial capacity of GI to bring on new colleagues. And the second thing is that we're starting to learn from the last years and all the different things that we've observed in the market around how we present GI, what the benefit package needs to be to attract talent. We have flexed around, we're open to remote working as part of the standards division. So traditionally we've hired in the Netherlands. We have now colleagues in different countries supporting us. And I think it's the combination of factors. I would still say that it is challenging given the overall interest in sustainability and ESG. It's a very tight labor market, but we're getting better at this, and I think we're advancing, and so we see some first. Well, again, we have the evidence in the room where we're very successful in attracting talent, and there will be more of this to come.
That's good, thank you.
So over to you, Elodie, then.
Well, thank you, Bastian, and thank you, Judy. And welcome everyone in Amsterdam and online. It's very pleased to present in person today. I think that's a first for me. And for this presentation, I will not only give a status update of the project since we last discussed it last November for the approval of the exposure draft. I also give a more general overview, go a bit back in time for the benefit, especially of the new GSSB members, so that everyone is on the same page. And we'll start with an overview of our process. So as part of its work program, the GSSB had identified a review of GRI 304, Biodiversity 2016, as a priority project to ensure that our biodiversity disclosures represent internationally agreed best practice and align with recent development and relevant authoritative instruments that have emerged, including to reflect the UN Convention or Global Biodiversity Framework from the Convention on Biological Diversity, which was approved last December, and other emerging best practice. So. Here is an overview of the project timeline. The final project proposal was approved by the GSSB in September 2021. We had 2 GSSB members who volunteered to sponsor this project, so Kim Schumacher and Michel Vacher, and so they provided as well guidance throughout the project to help liaise and be the liaison between the GSSB and the group of experts we work with. And indeed, as part of the GSSB due process protocol, we put together a group of experts. So in this case, the GSSB appointed a technical committee of 18 members to provide recommendation on the revisions of the standard.
Yeah. Yes, on that topic, when I applied to be GSSB sponsor, I had lost sight that there were only 2 terms in the GSSB, and so that I would have to stop this month, so I'm sorry, but you'll need to find someone else.
Yes, but still want to take the opportunity to thank you, Michel, for your guidance. I think it was also extremely helpful, and we certainly appreciate it a lot. So, and yeah, and Kim remains as well as a sponsor as well for this project. Yes, and then we started then really in earnest in November 2021, really the development of and the revision of the standard with the technical committee, and for about a year we met several times with them, either as a whole group or in subgroups. They had the opportunity to review the full standard twice and provide in-depth comment. Before we had an internal technical review and editorial review conducted by our standards editorial and publishing team, so the SCNP team, to really check the consistency of the technical content across our system of GRI standards, as well as the technical and editorial quality of disclosures. And after the technical committee had a chance to have a final check for any critical or fatal issues, this was submitted to the GSSB to seek approval to go for public exposure in November last year. And then so then it went for public comment. So this public comment period is really a key steps in our due process for the development of a standard. And in this case, it ran for about 3 months between December and February, so it closed a month ago today. So I'll say a bit more about the outcome of that public comment in a few minutes. But in terms of the timeline now, we're entering a phase of revision of the draft based on the feedback received. So we are now currently diligently going through all the submissions that we've received. We were quite successful for that, and analyzing all the comments received. And we're going to resume the discussion with the technical committee in a few weeks. Now we expect to present a final draft for approval to the GSSB by the end of the year. So here you see the GRI project team working on this project day in, day out. So I'm working with Matthew Dunn, who started in April last year and jumped right away into this project. And Sharon Aachen, who's a content specialist with the SCNP team, and also help develop the content in a way that is consistent with our overall systems of standards. We also have editorial support from Paul and project support from Nasteha. And here's the composition of the technical committee and the affiliations. So that's public information. You can find on the website the biography of all the members. In this case, the technical committee comprises 18 members with 4 business enterprise representatives, 5 members from civil societies, 2 members representing investing institutions, 1 labor member, and 6 members from mediating institutions. And today we have 1 amendment to the composition of the technical committee, which we submitted to the GSSB, and we'll go back to that at the very end of this presentation to go for the approval process. So those technical committee members, so several of them are also directly involved in the global instruments and initiatives that also supported informed the revision of the process, which was really helpful, especially as one really sort of particular or challenging aspect of this project is many of these instruments, tools, frameworks are being developed concurrently to our own standards. So we need also, there's an effort there that we need to do to keep up as well with those developments. And that's really a general overview of some of those key instruments that we're looking at, so instruments, framework, tools, as well as other standards that are being developed at the moment. And really a great deal of effort is made by all parties to ensure alignment or complementarities wherever feasible. And hopefully as well the presentation from TNFD tomorrow will also give an illustration of that. So here on this slide, if you look at those instruments and frameworks, methodological frameworks at the top, so the UN Global Biodiversity Framework from the Convention on Biological Diversity is really the key authoritative instruments. So the framework that was adopted in December really set the goals and targets globally to halt and reverse biodiversity loss by 2050. But there's also very active the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, so TNFD, the Science-Based Target Network, SBTN, where a lot of RTC members are involved in a way or another, and we also have direct contact with them. So the Partnership for Biodiversity Accounting, Financial, PBAF, and this Aligning Accounting Approach for Nature project, Align, were also directly also represented in our technical committee. And all those instruments and initiatives strive to define global best practice, to assess, measure organizations' impact, to set targets, to identify, as well to recommend information that should be publicly disclosed. So all those approaches so inform each other, first of all, but it's also underpin the development of overarching reporting standards such as GRI, the ISSB, also the European standards. And finally, at the bottom, you see like CDP is also a part of our technical committee. They are going to also consider or use our revised standards as an input to the questionnaire, which now include questions on biodiversity. And we also have ongoing, so an ongoing relationship with the World Benchmarking Alliance, which also released a nature benchmark last year and are going through the iterative process of assessing companies' performance. So it's quite a busy space. And we're keeping a track of all those developments as well. So now in this slide, you'll see a summary of the key proposals that were presented in the exposure draft that went for public comment. So the revisions proposed really, first of all, proposed to extend reporting impacts across the supply chain as well as the operation of a company. So this was identified as one of the key gaps in the current disclosures, because for many organizations, the most significant impacts on biodiversity are in supply chains. There's also a focus on the most significant impacts on biodiversity. And this means that we do not require organizations to report on all impacts, because identifying, measuring, reporting on all of those impacts on biodiversity could be challenging, especially for organizations that have very complex and large supply chains to account for. There's also an emphasis on providing location-specific information on impact. And so then we require site-specific information, which is also new when we consider our other standards. But that was also a strong recommendation from the technical committee to be able to understand and assess the impact of a company. We also have new disclosures to report on drivers of biodiversity loss, such as pollution, such as land use change, as well as on the changes to the state of biodiversity, and new requirements on the impacts on people resulting from an organization's impact on biodiversity have also been included. There's also management disclosures that focus on understanding how an organization applies the mitigation hierarchy to manage their impact, and how it aligns its policies and commitment with the new UN Global Biodiversity Framework. On the next slide, I'll go very quickly over it. I won't go into too much details, but it's just to show how the disclosures in the current standard relate to the disclosure or the proposed revision in the exposure draft. And also to say that that revision really was a fairly extensive revision of the GRI 304, whose content were developed over a decade ago, and there've been quite a lot of development in that space. So the content of the current disclosure really went through in-depth revisions with the technical committee, yes, a lot of new disclosure and requirement were also proposed in the exposure draft. So now moving on to the public comment period. So it has now concluded. So it went through from the 5th of December 2022 until the end of last month, end of February. We promoted the exposure draft and our surveys through a series of events. So first, the release of the exposure draft coincided with the COP15 from the Convention on Biological Diversity, where this global biodiversity framework was approved. So GRI was there, and we could also present our draft through a 3-side event there, and also through several one-on-one conversation with several stakeholders as well. We hosted 6 global webinars throughout these 3 months, so in December, January, February, with 2 launch presentations and 4 Q&A sessions covering different time zones. Our colleagues from the regions as well as GRI networks hosted regional events, 2 for the LATAM region in Spanish and Portuguese, and 1 for the African region. And through those events, the audience reach was around 2,500 people for those who had attended the events. And we also had several private webinars and consultation with interested stakeholders as well during that period. In terms of media coverage, we had a phase promotion with a really strong focus on the COP and our presence at COP in December, and then more communication on our own activities after the new year. So we had several publications, including a press release and promotion of our event at COP in December. We also had a Medium article in January and a newsletter article as well to prompt people to respond to our survey towards the end of the public comment period. And combined, these outreach contributed to a total of 28 external media articles that we tracked, with the coverage coming from all the way from Brazil, the US, Canada, several countries in Europe, Singapore, India as well. So, and we also have had several email and social media campaign as well. So here is an overview of the submissions that we received. So in total, we had 135 submissions, 111 through the online survey, and an additional 24 letters that were sent to the GSSB. It's a good number, I think, for a topic standard project. I think it's one of the highest number of submissions that we received. Out of those submissions, 115, so 85% have approved that the response would be made public, so they can be considered as formal feedback. 6% have said that they do not want to be published, so they'll be considered, but not as official feedback. And we're following up with a few submission by letter still to confirm whether or not they would be public or not. But that's still at least 115 submissions, public submission. That we got. Looking at the breakdown by constituencies, the majority of respondents were from the business enterprise constituency with 36% of the submissions, followed by the mediating institutions, 25%, civil society organizations, 15%, and then 9% from investment institutions. 13% of respondents choose other, but it was a mix between mostly mediating institutions and a few civil society and businesses as well. Looking at the geographical representation or coverage, I guess no surprise, most of the submissions came from Europe, with 42% of respondents from Europe, 22% from North America, 14% from Latin America, similar number for Asia, 13%, and then a few other submissions as well from Africa, as well as Middle East, and I'm missing one, I think, Oceania, the last one. And I didn't put it, but in terms of country, I think a total of 37 countries, I think, were represented, and top 5 was mostly the US. I think we got most responses from the US, followed by the UK, Germany, Brazil, and I think it was France and Canada. So we are still looking at the submissions, and what we do is like we really break down each submission into individual comments so that we can follow up and respond to all of them. So we know that we will have at least 1,600 comments in total, so we're finalizing that. So in terms of the feedback that we receive, I can't provide a comprehensive report now, but we haven't seen anything that were really unexpected in terms of comment. So, but obviously a lot of concerns or commentaries about the challenges to report information across the supply chain, how this can be done, requests for more clarity or explanation or more tools on how the information can be reported, how to determine and prioritize the most significant impacts. So we have a generic approach in our GRI 3, but of course, how can it be made more specific for biodiversity? Some issue around cumulative impact and how can we attribute the responsibility of a company when we look at changes to the state of biodiversity, and so on. So those are some of the examples of issues that were raised and that we'll now look at how we can respond and engage the technical committee as well on those issues. In terms of next steps, so now we'll be looking at the feedback and at implementing the final changes to the draft between now and the end of the year, so Q4 2023. We plan to propose that final standard for approval by the end of the year as well, and with translation started again from Q4 2023 and the new year as well. So that brings us to the end of this update. And now, yes, we need to go through the scheduled approval for the change in the technical committee composition. I think that's in item 3 in your meeting documents. And that's because one TC member had to step down. So they changed role and are not in a capacity now to contribute anymore, so we identified alternative candidate. So you have the information in your paper. So now I'll hand it over to you, Judy, to go through the approval.
Sure. My understanding, it's a new candidate from the same organization. Essentially, the efforts have been made to maintain continuity at this stage of the production of the standard.
Yes, indeed, that's really to maintain the continuity in the perspective and a representation as well of the business constituencies, and it's the person who is also replacing that departing member in their role within the organization. Yes, so that's the approach taken.
Thank you. Okay, as ever, are there any, we have to approve this, this proposed change of membership in the technical committee. Are there any questions or concerns or comments that anyone would like to raise in respect of this change? Hearing none, that's approved. So thank you very much for that. What comes next? Climate change. Who will pick this one up now? Margarita. Okay, thank you.
Can you hear me well? Yes. So it's a pleasure to be here. That is also my first time presenting in person at the GSSB. So okay, so today I will, from one hand, give a brief update on the project, and I will also, there will also be the presentation of the first group of nomination for the technical committee. So that will be done later in the speech. Okay, so starting from some background information on the project, the GSSB Work Program for 2020-2022 identified the revision of the climate change related standard and content as a priority. And this is because the existing GRI climate-related content were last revised in 2013. And since then, the topic of climate change, as you can imagine, has received significant attention at the international level. The objective of this project is to align with international agreed best practice as well as relevant authoritative instruments in the field of climate change, GHG emissions, and energy consumption, including the Paris Agreement, the IPCC report, and the International Energy Agency reports, as well as also latest authoritative methodologies in the field of GHG emissions and energy. So the scope of the project, from one hand, is to update the existing content, including the update of GRI 302 standard on energy, GRI 305 standard on emissions, the disclosure related to GHG emissions, so from the number 1 to number 5. And also the update of the disclosure number 2 on financial implication and other risks and opportunities due to climate change, that is included in the GRI 201 standard economic performance. And the idea for this last disclosure is that the content will be revised to avoid duplication of requirement with other standards that focus on climate change related financial disclosures. So that was the first scope of the project, but of course the idea is also to include new subjects that are not covered under the existing standard on climate change, including subjects like transition plan, carbon credits, emission targets, and consideration of just transition. For this new subject, great attention will be placed in considering the impacts both on the environment and people, especially on vulnerable communities and other stakeholders, including the consideration of their human rights. So this is an overview of the timeline for the project. The project proposal for the climate change standard project was approved by you last month. After the approval of the project proposal, I've been engaging with several experts through interviews, and I engaged with approximately between 30 and 40 of them. And thanks to these interviews, I'm able today to present the first group of nominations for the technical committee. The second and last group of nomination will be presented in the April meeting for your approval. The objective is to organize 4 technical committee meetings this year between end of May and October, and to have the exposure draft ready to be presented to you for the approval ultimately in Q1 next year. But as I mentioned in the last meeting, the idea is to have the exposure draft ready by the end of this year, and I'll explain in a moment how we intend to do so. Okay, so of course I will not do everything on my own for this project, so I would like to introduce to you the Climate Change Standard Project team. There will be Victoria Lacrosse, Bianca Bovero, and Pranati Mehta that will work in the project as technical content manager. Nastelis Jama will support the project team. Since September last year, both Paige Allen and Miguel Perez-Ludinha from the research team supported us with the research analysis and mapping activities. Paul Hoare and Alex Estrada, our writers and editor, will support us during the content development phase. And as you can see, the team is bigger than the usual for this project, and this will allow us to speed up a bit the timeline of the content development. This slide, as you just saw for the biodiversity project, is just to give you an impression of the landscape that we will work within for the climate project. Some of the actors are the same, most are not, because of course this is the organization working in the climate space. The idea is that for this project, as we saw for the biodiversity, we will tend to collaborate and align where possible with this organization, and we will try to replicate the good example that Elodie just explained to us that was conducted during the biodiversity project. So this will lead me to the technical committee, the first group of nomination for the climate project. So for this project, we have chosen a programmatic approach for the development of the content within the climate change standard. And this will lead us to address different subtopics within the scope into different subgroups, which will be, as instance, GHG emissions, energy consumption, other related issues, emissions-related issues, like, for example, carbon credits discussion, as well as transition plan and also consideration of just transition. Why did we decide to create subgroups? So from one hand, this will let us to better manage the scope of the content development within this project that, as you just saw, is rather wide in scope. To the other hand, of course, creating subgroup will allow us to speed up a little bit the content development phase. But of course, like, speeding up is not the core of what we do. So the primarily focus is on quality and stakeholder engagement and stakeholder consensus process as well. So bearing this in mind, I think this is a good way to approach, faster way to approach content development, ensuring both quality in the content and stakeholder engagement. So the idea is to have a technical committee composed between 10 to 15 members. The expert of the technical committee will contribute to some of the discussion in the subgroups, and they will develop recommendations on specific topic as part of the content development. The technical committee members can second colleagues in specific discussion according to specific expertise of the seconded colleagues. And as I anticipated before, I will present today the first group of nomination, and then in April, the second and last group of nomination. The rationale of presenting two groups, so two sets of nomination, is that upon your approval today, this will allow us to start the work on one or two subgroups, because the nomination for the GHG emissions and energy are mainly in this group that will be presented today. So the technical committee nominations presented today for approval include 4 mediating institutions, of which 2 are academic institutions from Europe and North America, 1 civil society representative with a thematic focus on the financial sector, 1 business enterprise active in the green investment field, which is a ESG rating agency from China, and that will be the nominations for today. The nomination that I will present in April will include 1 labor constituency representative, and this is already in progress thanks to our labor contact person. At least 1 business enterprise or financial institution additionally, but I've already received 2 confirmation on that, so there will be at least 2 more, and we are finalizing the last conversation with some other experts. At least 1 more civil society representative, and again, we are finalizing few conversations with experts, so it will be more than 1, I expect. And not to say that this will be on top, but just to say that among the final nominations for next month, the idea is to include Africa and Latin America representations to make sure that in the TC will include regional points of view as well. Based on the nominations for today, and as I know where we stand in the TC nomination, I think the group looks very good, and that we will be we will manage to cover all the constituencies and different regional point of view with the final group that we'll present next time. And finally, so we have secured 2 GSSB sponsors for this project. So I would like to thank again Anna Nefedova and Michelle Washer, even though we know that Michelle unfortunately will rotate off to the group. So I guess we'll understand how to manage that. And I just wanted to also say if any of the members, including the new members, would like to contribute to this project, to reach out to me after the meeting. So I would like to ask if there is any questions before I pass to the nomination list group of experts. So I'll pause for a moment.
Any questions for Margarita? Incidentally, I realized that I didn't invite any questions for Elodie a few minutes ago, so if there are any, we'll go back to that in a moment as well. Apologies for that. But for the time being, any questions for Margarita on this climate change topic standard? Yeah. Yep. So I'll do Galia and then Kent and anyone else. Yeah, Peter. Okay.
Thank you. I wanted to ask the two managers of the standards, how do you assure interconnection between the topics? Because we understood how we will do alignment with other frameworks, but between the standards, and not only human rights are also with climate and biodiversity.
And just to make sure I fully understand the question, you mean among different standards within GRI and also among the different subtopics within the scope of the climate change?
Among the GRI.
Okay, well, we will work together within the topic division, and we always try to find alignment. The labor standard will be doing the content development simultaneously to the climate standard. The biodiversity is ahead of us in terms of timeline, but we do update each other regularly to ensure fully alignment within the division, including also the sector standard program.
And that's also why we have this technical content manager in each project team as well. So they have this cross-cutting and this overview of all the system of GRI standards, and their role is also to help with achieving that consistency across all the standards, not only in the way we structure our standards, but also to see those interconnection between the topics. Yes, so that's also how we deal with it.
So Kent and then Peter.
I have two questions. One of the things that Elko had said at a prior meeting is that, as these standards are completed, if you meet this standard, then you'll meet the reporting, say, of the European Union. It'll sort of encompass all those requirements. And so I was kind of checking off the items, and the one thing I didn't hear mentioned was internal carbon pricing. That is, how do the companies use what kind of information do they use when they're making internal decisions? And so I was just wondering if that's going to be included in this standard.
So on that regard, this is a discussion that will take place under the other emissions-related discussion, like the subgroup that you saw listed in the slide. Of course, so I don't have the full answer of what will go on because we still have to start the content development, but that is a, let's say, topic that is already in our radar for discussion. And of course, we will make sure to include only those issues that will have a global scope, so not just if that has under the European Union discussion, of course, as a regional focus. So we will address and include it if there will be room and space for a global inclusion of the topic.
My one other comment is you've listed the business, people from business enterprises on the technical committee, and I don't see any representation. There's a limited set of industries that create the greatest number of greenhouse gas emissions, and it'd be nice to see companies from some of those particular industries represented on the technical committee.
Thank you for the comment. That's a very good observation. So I have to say that we have two confirmation of business enterprises that weren't confirmed in time for being presented to this meeting, but they will be presenting in April. So there will be two more business enterprises from the energy sector and from the technological industry, let's say. So, but of course we appreciate the comment, and we are still in conversation with other organizations as well.
And including myself.
That's
so
right.
The chemical industry could be represented, but that's only if the standard division doesn't have someone better than me.
Which may or may not happen, who knows. Peter.
Thank you. Firstly, with respect to the Labor constituency in this working group, or technical committee, I'm actually told that Global Unions has, in quite short time, came up with around 6 people, 6 nominations. So whether that reflects Global Union's interest in the climate issue specifically, or whether it represents Global Unions becoming more engaged with the Global Reporting Initiative, I'm not sure. I hope the latter. The other thing I'd like to raise is you mentioned just transition as a topic for as an issue for this technical committee. It's also on the agenda of the labour standards technical committee, and I think it's a live issue about where it will best be located. There is an argument that if just transition is to be confined to an issue related to climate mitigation, then perhaps it should be in the climate standards. But if there's a more broader view of just transition about it being structural change for a number of reasons, including, say, digitalisation, then it could be in the labour standards. So it's a live issue. That's all I'm pointing out, that it's currently on the agenda of both technical committees.
So thank you, Peter. Like, we are aware that the just transition is a cross-cutting issues. We are lucky enough that the timeline for both the climate change and labor project overlaps partially. So we have the room and occasion to align internally and also maybe align within with the 2 technical committees, the one on climate that will be formed and the labor one. So. And we'll see, like, during the content development, if there are, of course it will be tackled under the climate change, but during the content development we will engage with the technical committee for climate. We will understand better how to incorporate in these standards, making sure that the clear connection with the climate issues will be preserved, but also considering it and being aware that this issue is also included in the labor standard scope, and potentially even in other standard within GRI.
Thank you. Yes, please go ahead. Yeah, Jeff.
If you'll permit a question from an observer, I saw the alignment with GHG protocol was referenced. Given the update to the GHG protocol, are there plans for interconnection there? Do we have people on both technical committees, or what's that looking like?
Yes, thank you, Jeff. So the GHG protocol will be revising, as you correctly mentioned, the protocol, and the timeline doesn't, well, we are starting the process a little bit ahead of them, so we will have full collaboration and with them, and the GHG protocol is going to be presented today as a nomination for the technical committee. So we understood that probably the best way to ensure alignment will be to work with them and have them included in the technical committee. So their names are included in the nomination for this group. Please, Justin.
Maybe just to add to that, so we have a long-standing collaboration with the WRI, and they have been generally very supportive whenever we called on them to reflect their work in our standards and look to update. So we're building this project also under the assumption that we see this collaboration continuing, and we have all the signals that they are giving access to also the vast capacity resource in this area, which is very positive. Because I think for us to make a difference in this space, it is in offering a standard that links with the best practice, that's one, but it is also offering the right level of guidance for practitioners that is not available in other frameworks and standards, right? So we will have to put a fine point on that in making this offering meeting the needs of the reporters, of the preparers.
Shilendra.
Margaret, just so I think something very similar to what Jeff asked as well is that scope 3 on the GHG protocol, so there is some kind of a degree of materiality, so to speak, to choose from the 15 categories. Will the GRI standard be provided some kind of guidance on that materiality? That's my first question.
So we do align on the GG methodology on that. We do include the 15 categories within the current guidance for the standard. If your question is on the sector-specific guidance, that won't be included in the topic standard for climate change because that will be covered under the sector projects that you will hear about later. So we will look at the issue, all the issues and topics that I mentioned, including scope 3, from a sector specificity perspective, so cross industries.
Actually, just one more question. Margarita, on the, I saw you had basically used 305-1 to 305-5, and my question was on 305-6, which is ODS. There could be some degree of GWP or global warming potential of those ODSs. So would you expect that to get covered under scope 3?
So just to make sure I understood the question, you're asking if the 305-6 disclosure 6 and 7 with on non-GHG emissions will be included. So that won't be included. We will focus on greenhouse gas emissions, so only disclosure from 1 to 5 within GRI 305 standard, and the other two disclosure that will be left out will be addressed in another topic standard project that will commence in the next year.
Now, I can see that there's a number of comments in the Zoom chat, but I can't see what they are. So can somebody check and let us know if we have questions or comments coming in from remote members, or if it's just hellos and can you hear us?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
all right, fine.
Nothing coming in.
If anyone down the Zoom does want to speak or raise a point, please, I can see it when your hand is raised, but the visibility of the chat window is, and especially if now the chat window overlaps the photos, I don't know if I can see hands up. But anyway, if somebody can keep an eye on people who are participating remotely. Other comments or questions for Margarita about the climate change project?
I received a comment from Corley. It was more about voting for the this technical committee. Can I read it? It's quite long.
Yes.
I apologise if I missed certain information as I have been travelling, but I find it difficult to cast a vote on this matter, as there is an indication that a second batch of committee members will be presented in April, and it is difficult to assess the balance of the committee if it is not presented as a whole. I, however, have concerns with the geographical representation of the group presented here. Representation that can contribute particular expertise and experience from regions that are significantly exposed to the effects of climate change and the broader impacts of challenges of particularly adaptation would be critical. I suggest that the representation be sought from Africa, South America, and other developing regions, and perhaps particularly from business enterprises that understand the challenges of reporting from the ground, given that the group presented already covers specific and financial aspects.
Well, it's a perfectly good set of questions. And perhaps, Margarita, do you have a reply? I mean, for one thing, the logic of presenting two separate sets of proposed members, how can the GSSB make an informed decision about this? What can you tell us about the efforts that are being made to ensure that kind of representativeness and appropriate participation?
Yes, thank you, Corley, for the comment. Like, what I can say from my side is that we're fully aware of the importance to have a balanced representation, especially from different regions. Also, considering the specificity of the climate change topic and the impacts, they are not shared equally, I would say. So this is why I specifically point out in the slide and in my presentation that I am doing like an extra effort to make sure that African and Latin American regions will be fully represented within this TC. Like I'm in conversation with several African and Latin American civil society mediating institutions and also few business enterprises to make sure these points of view will be covered. And I also have to mention that we have secured and we are still in conversation with different peer reviewers organization where it was impossible to get them on board as technical committee because of the time commitment that of course will be rather important as well for any project, but especially for this project, given the wide of the scope. Some organizations weren't feeling comfortable with confirming their participation as a technical committee nominated, but they were happy and they already confirmed their presence as peer reviewers. So we will also work with that to include the maximum of voices to be heard within this project. For business enterprises, as I was mentioned, it's true that there is only one nomination listed as business enterprises, but 2 more were confirmed this week, so there will be 2 extra more, and we are also finalizing some other conversation within this week, early next week, because also there is a timeline for presenting the nomination to you for the next meeting. So that is what I can say at the moment. I don't know if
So I think the first concern that Corley raised was essentially approving 2 separate sets of candidates. I mean, just as a kind of practical matter, what would be the impact on the work if we were to reserve the approvals until the whole slate was available for consideration? Would that be something that could be addressed, or would that put a spanner in the works?
So again, on my side here, what I can say is that I know it's not common to present 2 sets of nominations, but the reason why we decided to do so for this project is that because given the wideness of the scope for this project and given the objective to having the exposure draft ultimately ready by Q1, even if it's not going to be at the end of this year, I would say that the most let's say the wideness of the scope tends to be around the concept of GHG emissions and energy consumption, and on that we are presenting now nominations of organizations that tend to be authoritative sources or references for this project as the GHG protocol. So of course, considering the timeline of the project, having the approval of the first set today will allow us to start doing some preparatory works for the GHG emission and the energy consumption. So in terms of the timeline, it will have an impact, but that's what I can say.
Okay, any other discussion then? Thank you very much for that response. Does anyone have any further questions? Or?
There's one from Jennifer on the screen.
Okay, the 2, Jennifer, why don't you, welcome, thank you for joining us. Why don't you share your question or comment straight into the meeting, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. It was just simply the 2 additional business enterprise nominations that you mentioned. Can you tell us which industries they represent?
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. So there will be 1 representative from the energy industry and 1 from the IT industry.
Okay, I'm sharing the concern from a couple that we make sure that we have businesses represented that are those that are challenged in some of their climate change reporting. Michelle mentioned the chemical industry, hard to decarbonize industry, I think are critical here to get their contribution.
And I think I can also share the names of the organization that already accepted. So there will be Microsoft and Ørsted, and we are in conversation with Michelle as well that's not confirmed yet, but that will cover the chemical industry.
Okay, so Microsoft plus an additional,
Plus Ørsted from the
Obviously.
energy industry.
okay. Thank you.
Harold.
And
maybe
I
to-
just confirmed today, by the way, I wanted to check first if in our company we didn't have climate specialists that would fit better than me. But actually we have specialists of energy, we have specialists of greenhouse gas emissions, but few that have the large oversight that I have, including impacts on governance, risk and opportunities analysis, and so on. So in the end, if it's someone from our company, it would be me.
Very good. Thanks. Harold.
Just a small consideration, but an important one is the WRI. So there are at least 3 persons very heavily involved from WRI, both in TC and subgroups. They have a large business enterprise input in their scoping, in their processes. So this is a double, you could say, a double security from also at the most heavy impacted industries and sectors, I would say. So it's a good consideration. So we were looking for this balance, and I think from our perspective, we really found this balance. We were also looking for organizations which maybe are upfront, and so the combination of that. So it's good to take that also into your considerations.
Yeah, Robin. Yeah.
I just wanted to raise, I mean, maybe we've covered it at a previous meeting in terms of the scope, and I know some of the discussion has been around is this how wide the scope is here. But I was just wanting to look again at the alignment slide that you had earlier. Yeah, and just wondering up at that UN level, if we've deliberately left out, or maybe it's there but not written in, things like the Sendai framework on disaster risk reduction and those sorts of instruments, which are sort of broadly related to climate change in that sense of dealing with, you know, those sort of extreme weather, extreme events, and then also what that might mean for how wide we stretch the emissions part versus the broader climate change part in terms of resilience and adaptation initiatives.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you for your comment, actually. So, to be totally honest, like that, we haven't, I mean, I personally haven't got across them as a type of organization to align, but since now you're commenting this, it sounds like a very good idea, actually, to think to enlarge a little bit, at least the conversation, then to understand if there is room also to include it within the scope of this project. I will say that from one hand, we just need to make sure that, of course, like we are targeting reporting organizations. So if there is room and let's say to include that type of disclosure to ensure transparency in that regard from a reporting organization perspective, I think it's a very good observation. So I will start with try to get in touch with the organization more, and then see what we can do proceeding from there.
It also, I mean, depending on that discussion, it might also influence other members or the recruitment onto the technical committee too, because I'm thinking of, say, the insurance industry or those sorts of groups that would have be gathering a lot of knowledge around, or have a lot of knowledge already around the changing climate and what that means in terms of you know, disaster management and you know, the impacts of a changing climate as a broader backdrop to this work. But maybe it's something that we did have a discussion on earlier when we were talking about the scope of this, but it's probably worth revisiting given this briefing, and what sort of expertise is represented in the technical committee on emissions versus the change part of climate change, if that makes sense.
And maybe on this I can also add that we have the UNEP FI financial initiative within the nominations for today, and they also, within UNEP, there is also an insurance initiative. So with the contact person we have that, we can also broaden the connection in that regard.
Please go ahead, Harold.
And also maybe to add, because it's a little bit different as we presented here, but we tried to cover it also. So we said we also have to put some extra effort because this broad and difficult scope also on the academia. So it was showed, but we did an extra effort on have high-skilled academic people in there from different institutions, just to have this broad scope, especially on impact related to climate change, from all views. And that's the difficulty, which we like energy is maybe the simple one, but if we go further, Margarita showed it, but I think that's and also this overview is very general, like with the biodiversity. There are many more people we're talking to, but this is general to give a little bit an overview of the connections.
I've got a couple of thoughts here. One is that, maybe this is a reminder so much as anything else, but having recently done the oil and gas and coal sector standards and some of these other projects recently, we know one of the consequences of doing new standards or revising existing standards is it tends to create contents that then will have a broader relevance across the rest of the GRI standards. So there will be quite a lot of very specific content from oil and gas, coal, agriculture, etc. All of these projects that have already been very heavily informed by the experiences of reporting organizations within those sectors that are already kind of settled, as it were, and need to be brought into the more generic sector agnostic kind of GRI standards, which will be drawn on for this, which to my mind kind of reduces some of the pressure on the technical committee membership itself to cover all bases, because we have had very well established and very well run multi-stakeholder projects around some of these contents in the recent past, which we should be able to rely on, I think, at a content level. The other thought is that in some other projects we have had a set of parallel processes where you've got your technical committee, but then you've also got kind of consultative groups. So groups of people from organizations that have relevant expertise. You can't have, a kind of endlessly large technical committee, but people who have been committed to provide specific comment, kind of first view of some of the drafts, and to be consulted along the way. And I wonder if there shouldn't be something similar for this, just given the range of material that will be, part of this, and the kind of the complexity of it as well, the interaction with other topics and specific sectors. That's just a couple of thoughts on that.
And thank you, Judy, for bringing this up, because this is exactly how we are approaching it, and what I meant, but I didn't explain it well when I meant the peer reviewer system. So we had a lot of conversations so far since the start of the preparatory work, even before presenting to you the project proposal. So I had a lot of conversation with a lot of organizations, and some of them were extremely insightful, but let's say it's either a matter of their time capacity to be allocated to this project that it's consistent, but to the other hand is also a balance of having experts that could have a rounded experience on more than one specific topic. If they only have a depth, specificity, and expertise on one, we other propose them to become a peer reviewer for our work, because we can, and we already schedule some conversation to further and better understanding some of the issues, like even on carbon credits. There are specific, doesn't mean that someone that is a full expert on that also is able to cover all the other in some circumstances. That's true, in some other that's not. So we will also work in that regard with the engagement with peer reviewers.
Thank you. Kim, you've got your hand up. Welcome.
Yeah, welcome. Sorry for everyone for being a little bit late. I just have two questions. So earlier it was talked about like someone from the energy industry, since that is a large industry. What branch of the energy industry are we talking about, or just like a large diversified energy company?
Thank you, Kim. So the organization that accepted the nomination is Ørsted. So they is the Danish multinational power company based in Denmark that was present. So the reason why we reached out to them is because they were mentioned many times within our network as one of the, let's say, best-in-class company within the climate space, because they approach a transition process towards renewable energy with the wind, specifically within the wind field.
Yeah, thank you very much. The second question is, earlier it was mentioned you also tried to reach out to the academic, and being in academia, I just wondered, how did you go about that, and what was the thing that made it difficult? Because I'm sure that you have quite a few climate scientists that would be willing to be part of a technical committee, I would assume.
So I would say it wasn't that difficult in the sense that, again, like I think one of the things that helped me at the very beginning of this project commencement, at least from my side, is that I engage in a lot of conversation with experts within GRI network that then lead us to deepen the network itself, including when GRI was present at COP27, that also proved as a very good occasion to develop this networking. And there we met with Oxford University and we started the conversation, and then eventually led us to nominate one TC expert for this group of nominations. And also, as you have seen, I imagine in the document, there will be seconded colleague, also an extra seconded colleague will join, will be presented in the next set of nominations, so in April. And then we reached out to Edinburgh University, Matthew Brander, because he was mentioned many times again within the network in discussion with other organizations, providing some specific studies on the GHG accounting, specifically on scope 2, but not only. So this is how we got in connection with them. And then I would like also to mention WRI and GHG protocol that were mentioned before. They're not universities, but the profile is, allow me to say, it's rather academic in the way they do their work.
Have you also reached out to a climate scientist? Because greenhouse gas accounting is not necessarily the same as, so some of those are like more in the accounting remit, which is not a bad thing, but yeah, for a climate change standard, it would also good to cover the more scientific part of like physical emissions and things like that. Did you reach out to some of those? Because there I can recommend some people if that is still an area that.
Yes, thank you, Kim. So yes, we did. We're in contact with some of them. I believe I can name them in the public meeting out of privacy issues, but we were in connection with some of them and some key leading organizations and key leading academics. In the end, we didn't finalize the way to find, again, the time commitment from their side, but also to balance the fact that from one hand, we want to preserve the academic and scientific point of view, but to the other hand, and we also have to work on content development that will make sense to be included within a disclosure for reporting organization. But saying that, if you could introduce me to the contacts that you have in mind, I will very much appreciate it, and we can deepen the conversation there and see if there is room and interest from their side to join us, or as said before, maybe to explore peer reviewing opportunities. So
because accounting is important, but it needs to be rooted in science. And for example, I see the Science-Based Targets Initiative there, and I'm someone who's quite critical of them. So of some of their methodologies. So there's always a difference between like climate experts who are more like in the accounting remit and actual climate scientists. So there's a big difference, and I do think that point of the science element needs to be properly represented, because that is one of the gaps right now, one of the blind spots of many reporting frameworks, that it's very strongly in the accounting or like in the reporting element, but the science behind it, sometimes it's just, or we reference the IPCC a little bit and then we're good. And I do think having that input from the climate science community would strengthen any framework significantly, in my opinion.
Thanks. Harold?
Yeah, but because we have so many beautiful conversations, I think it's good that Kim, that you just exchanged with Margarita. I want to say via the Potsdam Institute, we got in contact with the colleagues of Johanna Rockström. So, and we also came in contact with the Planet or the Earth Committee, I have to say. And we were discussing with them how these are really a lot of, as you know, a lot of people in the climate, specialists and academia. So we were talking with them, how could we make sure that we can find a way to get their inputs, especially as you said, you have these different views. So that's what we try to figure out with them. They're in Scandinavia.
I think the Potsdam Institute you mentioned, Johan Rockström. So I think either the Stockholm Environment Institute or the Potsdam Institute for Climate are probably, I would say, the go-to places where, and I know people there, so I do think it would be quite easy because I'm also an expert reviewer for the IPCC report. So I do think that should be feasible.
Yeah, so then we have two entrances, so I think that will play out very well. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, that's very helpful. I want to do a quick time check, and obviously this has been an extremely important conversation for us to have, but I wonder if we are able at this point, how do members feel about putting forward the approval of the proposed slate of members for today? Have you been given the information that you need about this process so far, and enough information about what to expect in the next slate of candidates to be able to go ahead with that?
Judy, can I ask one more question?
Yes.
Yeah. When you look at the business enterprises, did you get any nominations from the hard-to-abate sectors or from the agriculture sector?
So, as I said before, like, we are finalizing some conversation, but I maybe just want to share that the approach and the strategy that we wanted to have for these project nominations, especially considering the business enterprises, was rather choose the let's say, those best-in-class example, let's say, that could lead us, because as we mentioned, for example, Ørsted is a good example toward the transition. So the idea was to approach it not to the most challenges or the hard-to-abate point of view, but to have some organization that could bring the point of view of good examples in the at least attempt to do the transition already. But this doesn't mean that we won't include them. We are finalizing some of the conversation, but maybe it was important just to share this strategic approach in how we selected the nominations to be presented.
Okay, do you have much more here, Margarita, as far as the
no,
presentation?
in the sense that my slides are actually, them anymore. They're blocked, but I don't have other slides in the sense that there are some. Okay. Okay, no, because I only have the slides, but I wasn't supposed to go through them as you received the biographies and the nominations already, so the slides were over.
Yeah. Okay, can I call the question then? We'll see where we go with this. I would like to ask if the GSSB approves the proposed members for the technical committee in item 3. And is there any, we've had quite a lot of discussion. Are there objections? Are there specific concerns that members would like to raise? Yeah, Evan.
Just that Corley's objection should be noted.
Absolutely, yes, yeah. And otherwise...
One question. If we delay the approval till April, what is the impact on the project?
Yeah, I can come in on that. So I've asked the team to reconsider the timelines, and as Margarita has pointed out, part of the approach now is to pass discussions and advance certain discussions early and bring them together with the full complement of the technical committee at an advanced stage. So I think if we were to push this out now, we just have to recognize that the expectation towards the team to bring something about by the end of the year is not going to be realistic, and we will be looking towards the end of the first quarter of next year. That's also acknowledging that expert involvement around the end of year season is always difficult. December and January, you cannot really work on things like that if you're in a critical phase. So I would say it would push out the project easily by 2 to 3 months in terms of the exposure draft, right? So this is also a strategic consideration. I think for us, we will have, in all likelihood, European standards that are in application next year. We will have the ISSB S2 becoming effective as of next year. In that context, to have a substantive response to the question, so what is GRI adding to the climate change debate in form of an exposure draft, that is an advantage that we would like to have. And hence the very creative, I think, innovative approach to be fast while adhering to due process, right? That's not to take away from the concerns at all. I'm fully with the board on these points. But yeah, the timeline would be impacted, and I think we would be looking at the end of first quarter next year.
Yeah, so I think there are 2 points here. One is we need to come out with an informed position in the market very quickly. The second is now when you bring in that informed consensus, there should be a balance in terms of that consensus. So do we have a flexibility when you come for the April meeting? Do we have a flexibility to add more technical committee members if a particular constituency is not well represented?
Absolutely, yeah. No, I think so. We have the guidance from you at this stage, so we will work towards that. We look at the business constituency, we look at regional representation. If there are further gaps, then we can still, I think, add to the membership to address that issue, provided that we get experts that can free up the time, because that continues to be the main issue here, right? It's a big ask. When we speed up things, that also means more dense content creation processes for the experts involved, and we heavily rely on them, of course.
Yeah, maybe to add on this balance, so the TC meetings, we will not have a TC meeting before the entire TC composition is there, but it's just we are able then to start with a subgroup meeting, and the balance is there. So other thing is if the content has to go through the TC, of course, and has to be discussed in TC, so it's also there, it's a double aspect. But as always, yeah, we look at the constituencies, regional inputs, all business enterprise, all constituencies around the table. So that's what we work on. But it's more like a time issue, and especially the second TC will just before summer. So if we have to bring it over, it's probably more than 3 months. That's not the reason just to say yes or no, but it's more like just to be aware that it's practically very, yeah, this was the only option we saw to bring it where it is now. And we're actually very happy with this first group, but yeah, we know it's not the full group. Yeah, that's true.
So, and I think you've just made a really important little side point there, Harold, which is to say that the slate of candidates for approval today has been forwarded specifically to be able to populate one or more of the specific subgroups within the committee, not as a kind of 50% of the whole, but as a sort of 100% of certain identified portions of them. So the intent is not that the slate today is representative of what the intended whole is in the first place, and that the conversations that would be allowed to be started would be very specifically, focused around what's relevant to those subgroups in advance of the full constitution of that group. Yeah. Okay, so going back to calling the question then, do we have further objections, or can we consider the approval to have passed? Any further? Hearing none, I will thank you very much for that very valuable conversation and for the robust feedback, but that is now approved. Thank you for that. Again, I'm going to do a time check here. So technically we've got 5 minutes before our coffee break. I don't want to endanger that just because, it's the middle of the afternoon here and we probably need to have a bit of a break. We have presentations on the topic standard project for labor and for economic disclosures. And I want to go back. Why don't we just say, as we've got 5 minutes here, I want to go back and invite any questions for Elodie about the biodiversity project and whether there's, I don't know if you can cast your mind back that far. We have had a lot more discussion of that over the recent months. So perhaps there aren't any questions that anyone needs addressing at the moment, but I just want to give you the option to do so. I'm not seeing any. I'm not seeing any hands up on the Zoom that I can tell. So thank you very much. I think that one is okay. Why don't we break? We'll come back in, is it 15 minutes that we have for the break? We've got 15 minutes, so that is 2:45 in Europe. And then we'll come back and we'll have the presentations on labor and economic disclosures, and then move into the sector updates as well at that point. Yeah? Back after that short break. We are still on session 1.7, which is the topic standards update. We have some presentations on the labor project and the economic disclosures project, and then we'll move from there to the sector standards update. So who will be talking to us about labor? Is that you, Izzy? Please, go ahead. Welcome.
Hi everybody, and thank you for inviting us here to present. Today I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the Labour project and how we stand, and also explain a little the structure of the Labour project and how we are sort of going forward with this. I'd just like to introduce the GRI Labour project team, which is myself, Pranati, Alex and Astea. Just to give you a quick, just to go back to the project objectives, was to revise and develop labour-related GRI standards. So to sort of use a programmatic approach and update the series of labour standards in line with the new authoritative instruments, which include the UN Guiding Principles, OECD Guidelines for Multinational Enterprises, ILO core conventions, and obviously other developments that have been happening in this sort of landscape and human rights space. I want to just pause a moment to say, like, when I got the project, I really wanted to kind of develop it in a holistic approach and make sure that there was a framework that we could further develop. So there is there is a lot of revision and a lot of changes, but I really want to kind of make it a future-proof series sets of standards that they could be read on their own, but they also supply a holistic viewpoint of labour and employment-related standards. Just to go over, I'm going to start referring to set 1 and set 2, and that is for a few reasons, logistical and also reasons, is that we're developing the two sets of standards in two sets. The first one is more labour-related standards, and the second one is more regarding the human rights standards based on the ILO fundamental principles at work. So they're sort of based in a sort of a thematic approach. These are the sort of the current, so on the left side of the slide, set 1, you see the current labour-related standards, and to the right is sort of the current working title of these standards. I would just like to sort of highlight that the TC has still not confirmed. These are working titles. They may change, so I say it with a bit of a health warning to it. So the first set of the first topic standard that has developed from it and as a sort of a standalone subject is remuneration and working time, and it's the first set of series of disclosures we'll be working in. 4 of the existing disclosures are being revised within this. So that's the sort of the first section. The second one is employment, and this is sort of still a working title, and it's sort of regards to employment contract relations, and a key subject of this is diverse forms of employment, also termination, major changes, and data and privacy. The third topic standard is training and education, which again still mirrors the existing GRI 404. One sort of disclosure you may have noticed, and that's supplier social assessment. It's not being placed on now because the current idea, is to integrate this within each topic standards. But again, this may change. This is up for revision, or the nature of this may change somewhat. So again, a further health warning. And again, I would like to just mention set 2, which focuses on the ILO core fundamental principles, which is non-discrimination, freedom of association and collective bargaining, child labour and forced labour. We've also included diversity and equal opportunity, as it's a sort of a mirror, or it goes very much hand in hand with non-discrimination, and these can sort of be developed together to make sure that they tell a complete story. This is the current timeline of the project. As you see, we are focusing on the first set, and we hoped for next year, this time next year, for it to be with the TC for review, and for public comment period, and then analysis. And then we'll start developing the second set, or focus more intensely. I think when you start the labour project, the scoping is all the subjects together, but to really form the second set at the start of 2024, for again to have a second set that will be up for your approval for the first public consultation period, and then for approval overall. And we're also doing it in 2 sets, so you can sort of see the overall picture of how these interlink together. And again, they will be standalone standards, but obviously you want to make sure that the coverage is full and complete. I'd just like to go a bit about, to discuss a little bit about our technical committee, our TC, and also our advisory committee. We have set up this it differs from other topic and sector standards, so I just kind of want to a little bit describe our process for this. We have a tripartite technical committee with 2 representatives nominated by the ILO, the International Labour Organization, 2 representatives from the International Trade Union Confederation and the Global Unions Federation, and 2 employer representatives from the IOE, the International Organization for Employers. So our advisory group, so we also set up an advisory group during the process to make sure that all the constituencies within the GSSB process is represented, and also to provide additional input. We have selected them, and previously back in December and February, I believe, the GSSB selected our 11 experts. This was with the relevant knowledge and expertise, again, to balance the constituencies, and we have a good balance of academic, mediation, and financial institutions. And I just would like to discuss a little bit about the interactions and the way of working with the advisory group and the technical committee. The technical committee will be the ones to have the final authority, the final say, and the final conclusion to put it forward to the GSSB. But there will be a dialogue with also the advisory group where we ensure that feedback a two-way feedback will happen, that the advisory group can give practical advice, solutions, and also feedback to any issues and situations. But I wanted to kind of emphasize that the advisory group is a peer review and will also support the development of the standards. And we're working with them in different ways. I just would like to just go over the advisory group application process, just to kind of give you a recap from this. So back in September and October, we had a call for the advisory group. We had, again, over 270 applications from 58 countries. And while there was a high level of interest, it wasn't evenly represented geographically, but also in constituency-wise. We had most applications from Europe, North America, and Asia, Oceania. And again, 75% of the applications came from business enterprises. We interviewed 13 candidates in total, and 11 were invited and accepted to be in the advisory group. In December, we said that we felt that there was lacking of representation in Latin America and Africa. We have found, in the start of the year, we found somebody to represent the Africa region, and we're still looking for the Latin American region, but and are still, for the next duration of the project, are still open, but yeah, so we're nearly complete. And again, I just wanted to kind of sort of describe the sort of the focus we had with the advisory group, and that was really to kind of have persons and experts with experience of human rights and labor-related subjects within the human rights sort of discourse, knowledge of key authoritative instruments, knowledge of sustainable reporting, and also understanding the needs of the sustainability reports. And again, understanding also, you know, issues sort of data and everything like that has sort of come up. Also experience with multi-stakeholder initiatives and a willingness to kind of work in a consensus-based and find a sort of a solution-based approach to a few issues, a few questions and that we have within the labour standard. And also a working level of English. So yeah, that was sort of the overview, and that's sort of just to recap the last updates I had with the advisory, with yourself. And yes, if there's any other further questions, yeah.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Izzy? Evan.
Could you give us, and I'm sorry if I'm late to this, a bit of an explanation of the distinction between the technical committee and the advisory group? What are the areas of responsibility? How do they differ? Because one is obviously much broader than the other.
So the advisory group, again, as you mentioned, is a lot more broader, and they are tasked with giving suggestions and feedback to the TC. The TC have the overall decision-making authority within this, And the advisory group, we also very much selected persons on their experience working with organised companies, with data, and also regional representation as well. So they have a lot more of a, they sort of complete the overall picture within the TC, within the labour project. And they're also tasked with, we are holding very smaller subgroups. They're also tasked with peer review, and we're also holding a lot more smaller subgroups for them to help us also develop and revise the standards to then present to the TC.
I guess I'm asking for more of a, why the distinction between the two, rather than just have a broader technical committee?
So I think that goes back to focus on the tripartite focus of the TC. I think with Labour, we really wanted a tripartite method to have the workers, the unions and the employers all come together and work on a consensus, similar to the universal standards where a similar tripartite method was used. So it was really to have the sort of the three actors involved in any labour contractual relation present.
Perhaps I should come in there. So I'm one of the two Labor people on that technical committee. It is replicating the process that was used for it was a subcommittee of the GSSB, was it? That on the revision of the universal standards of labour topics, and the tripartite approach worked well there. It's working well again, except that we're still in an early stage, still the relatively early stage of building up common understanding on the various topic areas. There's a certain wariness. The stakeholders know each other well, but they have strong interests and not always common interests. When we get to actually drafting work, I'm sure there's a willingness to achieve. It worked well for the review of the universal standards, and in fact, some of the material on workers who are not employees came from the employer side. So I'm hoping we can achieve that level of positive energy for greater disclosure in this technical committee. That said, it's it's an ambitious project, so there's some awe about the size of the project, knowing that we do need to come up with a lot more than what's currently there. But I'll leave it there.
Yes, thank you, Peter. And I must say, I'm very, on a day-to-day level, impressed by the level of enthusiasm and dedication from both my TC and my advisory group. For a group of experts with high, busy agendas, they always have time for me, which I very much appreciate.
Thank you. Any other questions? Anyone on the Zoom with any questions? Not seeing any. Thank you very much then, Izzy. I think we're going to move on to economic impact at the moment before going on to the sector standards. So who's with us? Very good. Welcome.
Great. So good afternoon, everyone. And thanks again, for making the time and giving us the opportunity to speak to you today. I think I'll keep it brief. And essentially what I'd like to do today is just provide you with an update on the work being done by the topics team to revise the GRI economic impact standards. The objective for today's session really is, particularly for the new GSSB members, to give them a sense of the work that GRI has done relating to its economic impact standards, a sense of the progress that we've made related to our proposed revision of the GRI economic disclosures, and give you a sense of how we'd like to move forward, I think, in the coming weeks and months. So I think just keeping in mind, this project has not yet commenced, so it's not at the level of progression as the projects that my colleagues have spoken to earlier. A little bit of background, I think, is always good. So in the context of GRI standards, and if we look at the universal standards, how we look at the economic dimension of sustainability is really around an organization's impacts on, firstly, the economic conditions of its stakeholders and on the economic systems that it impacts at local, regional / national and global levels. Keeping in mind, we do not focus on the financial condition of the organization itself here. Within our GRI 200 series, the standards look to address the flow of capital among different stakeholders and then also the main economic impacts of an organization throughout society. So we currently have 7 standards within our economic standards series, comprising economic performance, market presence, indirect economic impacts, procurement, anti-competitive behavior, anti-corruption and tax being the most recently revised standard of this grouping. And I thought it would be good just to give you a sense of what's come before. If we look at the middle bullet, so essentially as part of the GSSB work plan in 2017 to 2019, they had identified the revision of our GRI 201 economic performance standard as a priority for revision based on inputs from public consultation as well as inputs from GSP members themselves. And essentially this was scheduled to go forward at that time. What had happened was that additional research was also done and presented to the GSSB. And with that in mind, they subsequently decided to expand the scope of the revision. And so the intention was to also include GRI 202 and 203 as part of this revision in 2017. Again, because they felt that the work across the 3 of these would be able to be overseen by similar individuals within a technical committee setting. And also, it had been several years since any of these standards had been revised. So unfortunately, this hadn't happened, so these have not been revised as of yet. And if we come forward to today, the revision of the economic impact disclosures are once again on the work plan of the GSSB for 2023 to 2025. Now, if we think about the objective of this project, so it's currently quite broad, and I think that's a theme that you'll see running through at least this presentation. I think when we think about this topic is that economic impact in itself can be quite far-reaching, and I think Judy touched on it very well earlier on in that at the outset we've been confronted with the challenge, the opportunity to think about how this is likely to impact not only 201 to 203, which would be kind of the core standards that we were initially considering, but across our economic disclosure series and potentially beyond. And how do we then coordinate across our team, across our division, and think about a structure that enables us to provide organizations with the best possible reporting requirements that are reflective of their impacts on the economy without being limited or hindered artificially by the structures we currently have in place. So with that in mind, that's our high-level objective for this project, and we'll go into a bit more detail around this as we go forward. So I thought that, given the nature of this topic, I thought it would be good to present a slide like this, which essentially gives us a sense of the way that organizations have been engaging with our existing economic impact disclosures and standards. And this has been useful for us to think about, particularly because refining and defining the scope will be quite critical in terms of how we go forward with this project. And understanding which areas of economic impact disclosures and standards already have significant traction, uptake, and interest amongst reporting organizations is one step in informing our way forward. So what you see here is basically the results from a study that have been conducted by a third-party organization on behalf of GRI, really with aims of understanding the impact of GRI standards on corporate sustainability reporting and practices. In terms of the data itself, so data was collected on 228 reports prepared in accordance with the GRI standards and submitted by 114 organizations. And this data was captured, as you can see there, over two periods, 2016-17 and 2019-20. To keep in mind, what I'm going to speak to here is only 6 of our 7 economic standards. Market presence was not included in this study. So if we start off with the first graph, as you can see here, this basically tells us the average number of economic GRI standards reported against by reporters across the region. I think what's quite clear here is that across the 2 periods, we see on average around 3 standards within the GRI 200 series that are reported by reporters across various regions. Aside from North America, we've seen a change there. But this represents about 50% of our economic impact disclosures, keeping in mind market presence was excluded. The next graph, so in the bottom right-hand corner, looks at the number of GRI reports between our 2 reporting periods containing reporting on indicators related to the selected GRI topic standards. So where organizations reported on different disclosures related to these standards, this was captured here. And I think what you can see quite clearly is that the reporters that from the study that reported on economic performance, so the GRI 201, reported on some disclosures within the standard, were 89% of the reports compiled, while you see around 71% of the reports contained disclosures that organizations reported on related to GRI 205, anti-corruption, and 43% related to procurement practices, GRI 304. I think, what we assume from looking at this, at these results, at least for economic performance standard, was that the reason it was so popular and organizations reported on it so frequently was because a lot of the indicators draw on financial information that organizations would already be capturing in their financial statements potentially. So it was a bit more of a low-hanging fruit for organizations, something they could, I think, more readily understand and relate to. But it's also interesting just to see across the standards where this interest lies. What I haven't included here was also the change in reporting against disclosures within these standards. And the takeaway here that I wanted just to note was that in GRI 201, so the disclosure 2011, so economic value generated and distributed, what we saw was that over the reporting periods, there was around a 15.5% increase in reporting on this specific disclosure, while we saw the next biggest increase, not next biggest, but another significant increase within the disclosure in the procurement practices standard, and this is the proportion of suppliers that are locally based, and this was around a 16% increase. So I think these were the 2 main ones where we saw really substantial changes related to specific disclosures over this period. In terms of this slide, essentially I just wanted to give you a very high-level overview of the proposed timeline. Our intention, as we'll see in the next slide in a bit more detail, is to commence, subject to GSSB approval, with this project in June, to be completed in 2025. This is, of course, subject to the decisions that we make around scope, first of all, and then phasing and timing of different project components or how we see best to approach this. This slide really, it's a much simpler slide, but essentially I wanted to just touch on the work we've done to date. So where we are is at the project initiation phase. Since the start of this year, what we've tried to do is begin conducting research and various stakeholder interviews to get a sense of the scope and how we'd like to think about framing this particular topic revision project. Essentially, going forward, what we would like to do is go into a bit of a deep dive with the GSSB in April. So I'll be shortly submitting a discussion document where I'd like to test in a lot more detail than we'll be able to do today some of the concepts and our proposals around how we'd like to structure this project, with the view, as I said, to ultimately submitting a final proposal to the GSSB in June for approval. So hopefully we are able to make good progress in that April discussion, and then it'll just be a matter of putting that down formally for the GSSB to sign off on. So in terms of, I won't go into a lot of detail here, but the background research that we've done, to give you a sense of how we've approached it. So I've been working closely with our research team, who's led by Miguel, and we've been, we've adopted a number of these approaches to try and get a sense, as I said, of the direction that we want to take this set of projects in. And how we've started off, I think very similar to how other projects would have been addressed or approached, is reviewing the different economic impacts of organizations based on various authoritative intergovernmental instruments. I'll touch on those in the next slide. We've also looked to analyze key topics and emerging impact areas. And I mean, this includes things like indirect economic impacts. So concerning impacts of an organization on the economy that would take place outside of the immediate organization. So I think the value chain impacts here is something that tends to come out quite strongly in the research that we've done. Also impacts on local communities and vulnerable groups is something that we've seen pop up. And then consideration of shared value and shared benefits, and the model that the organization adopts in terms of how it runs its operations. We've also tried to map our existing economic standards against other frameworks and standards, as well as jurisdictional regulatory initiatives such as ESRS standards as well. And then we've consulted several key stakeholders on the landscape and emerging trends related to economic impacts, including the Global Impact Investing Network, Oxfam, PwC, and Oxford Economics, among others at this point. As I mentioned, these are some of the authoritative intergovernmental instruments and initiatives that we've considered at this stage. I do not pronounce that these are exhaustive, but I think these have been quite useful at this stage in giving us a sense of some of the key areas that we need to understand a bit further, as well as thinking about, from a reporting perspective, what are the indicators and the metrics and tools that organizations can already think about when it comes to reporting on some of the disclosures that we have in mind and the impacts that we foresee as being quite significant for the standard. So, I mean, here, this slide really is just to reiterate the point that I tried to raise earlier, which is the importance of narrowing our scope, because it can be so broad. So economic impacts can arguably fit across our entire economic series and across a number of our social standards as well. So for us, we want to already start thinking about, what is realistic for GRI as an organization to commit to and develop over the short and medium term. I think that will be key in being quite pragmatic about this. What additional value can we as an organization already add? So what are the low-hanging fruits which we can think about that organizations may already be capable of reporting against. And I think something that we've considered here in the discussions that we have is, and I'll touch on it in a bit more detail, but looking beyond your profit, loss, and revenue metrics, and thinking about, what do organizations need to report against or be aware of to really provide lasting impact on communities, and how does their presence either enhance, facilitate this, or actually undermine this? How can organizations demonstrate economic impact that lasts, ultimately? These are the things that we're thinking about. And yeah, that'll take a bit more work in terms of coming up with I think, really innovative proxies and metrics that can be used to illustrate this. So this slide really, I thought this would just be interesting to kind of bring to everyone's attention. And it just takes a second for us to kind of look back. So as I mentioned, the GRI team had gotten quite far along in the process in terms of developing the draft proposal for this project in 2017 and presenting it to GSSB. It was slightly different at that stage, so it's not a one-for-one, but I think it was useful, at least for our team, to look back and think on some of the comments that the GSSB provided at that time. Not to anchor or bias us, and not to proclaim that this is still relevant 6 years on, but I think it was a good starting point for us to kind of jog our thinking around this topic. So I think just to go through them, what was noted at the outset by the GSSB at the time was the agreement amongst members that it was important to focus on socioeconomic impacts of organizations. I think this was in contradiction to maybe the thinking that economic impacts and social impacts are mutually exclusive and independent, and this is not the case. So I think our thinking is to look at this from a more holistic perspective, and as I said, not necessarily limit ourselves to one or the other at this stage. There was a lot of support for the harmonization of the OECD guidelines for M&Es and the UN SDGs, and I think we will continue along this path and to keep that in mind. I think there was also a lot of support or recommendation around the inclusion of indirect socioeconomic impacts that would be needed here. And this really speaks to this idea of impact on local communities, as well as thinking about local procurement in more detail. We already have a standard for that, of course, but I mean, that's again one of the challenges that we'll think about. Job creation, I think, was something that was noted as being a core indicator when we think about economic impact. The nature of jobs, both indirect, informal, are also something that we'd like to consider. Again, we're aware of potential overlaps that this may have with the labour standards that Izzy has spoken to today. The next one was around this recommendation to consider alignment of activities to government and initiatives, and I think what this was speaking to was really to understand the extent to which organizations in their own policies, in their own strategy, in their activities, either complement or, again, are in conflict with national development or economic growth policies and initiatives that may already exist within the market they're operating in. As I think for most organizations, these national policies would already be positioned to align with international authoritative sources and the SDGs. The next point was around that economic performance should include the concept of shared value. And I think, again, what this is alluding to is that the space and economic impact is a lot more dynamic than just thinking about profitability or revenue, but that it should also look to encompass impacts on society and how benefits are shared or not amongst communities and stakeholders within the space that the organization is operating in. There was a warning that we should try and keep it simple, so we don't want to, I think, discourage organizations that are already making use of these standards by overcomplicating what it is that we're asking for. And in order to do that, we need to think more carefully about, what are the key impacts that we need organizations to report on. And then there was just a suggestion around a missing topic, and as you can see, digitalization, automation was this, and it was noted back then as a big priority, just in terms of how it affects how businesses operate, both through their workforce, their customers, their suppliers, and also communities themselves. So I think to conclude the session, I just wanted to give the GSSB and the new GSSB members just a bit of an update in terms of where we are with our thinking, by giving you this kind of snapshot of the framework that the team has been developing as part of our revision work. Essentially, what you see here is what we'd consider kind of core overarching themes that we believe should be considered when thinking about an organization's impact on the economy. And our sub-bullets, again, they're not exhaustive because of that's just not the purpose of today's discussion, are kind of subtopics or elements which we'll use to think about how these impacts can manifest themselves within society, and then what indicators we would kind of need to consider to measure this. So, I mean, you can see starting off, we'll look at goods and services. And I think narrowly defined, what we'd intended here is really to think about, the economic impacts that can be directly attributed to the consumption of an organization's goods and services. So goods and services produced by an organization. And the reason we did this is because at present, there's no explicit place in GRI standard to reflect these impacts. And I think input from the sector team was that this is coming up more frequently in the work that they're doing, and we thought it may be quite relevant to include here and test with the team, because the type of impact that this represents can potentially be, I think, quite large. So essentially, if we look at it both from positive and negative perspective, if we think about consumption, positive impact on goods and services, would really look at the utility that it may provide individuals through consumption spending. And if we look at the negative side, we can think about pricing and access to goods and services. So if pricing is not conducive, there's maybe substantial negative effects for consumers in the market. And if access is denied and usage is not, enabled or for consumers, then again you have substantial negative impacts on consumers, which may impact their ability to meet their basic needs. So I think this is something that we would like to do a lot more research into and think about. But again, we'd like to take this discussion forward with the team, with the GSSB members as well. The next one is really around distributed value, and I think this draws on significantly on GRI's existing disclosures. So I mentioned GRI 201 on economic performance related to the economic value generated and distributed. And essentially, what we want to do here is look at the impact of these flows of value that are generated and flow to an organization because of its presence and its operations. So, I mean, the nature of this is that we feel this is quite an important one to consider, just already given the type of traction that it's gained. I think it does still remain relevant, but again, we'll need to just discuss that further. And essentially the thinking here is that organizations, at least in our minds, are compensated for the value that they add through their operations. So through these operations, they'll generate value, but conversely, they'll also be generating income and receive value from stakeholders. So this is something that we want to try and capture in a way. How we do this remains to be seen. Again, we don't want this to be a purely financial reporting exercise. So we need to think about exactly what it is that organization should report on. I've put here payments distributed and received. Again, it's very simple and high level headings here. So if you think about payments distributed, this could look at licenses and fees, payments for compensation to employees, for instance, as well as payments to suppliers along the supply chain. Payments received could look at various concessions made by government, donations, tax relief, tax breaks as well, and then also income earned through the sale of goods and services and other assets potentially.
Matthew,
Oh.
I'm really sorry, but I want to do a time check here
No,
because we've actually got technically 20 minutes to the
Okay.
end
Not a
of the
problem.
sector standards update, and we haven't started the sector standards
Not a
update.
problem.
So if you could, I think if we could kind of take it as read as far as what with the concept that you're sharing with us here. I wonder if we could sort of as quickly as possible get through to the end of
Yeah, so
of
this is it. So I speak to the rest of them, but you can take it as read. And as I said, in April, we'll be happy to jump into more detail with the group.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I'm sorry to cut you off. Just to ensure that we have enough time to get through the rest of our agenda this afternoon, which means that I'd like to turn it over to the Sector Standard Project for Financial Services. Who is going to be talking to us about that? Mia is right, okay. Claire, thank you for joining us. And have we got the slide deck? Yeah, there we go.
Okay, can people?
Yeah. Oops. There we go. Okay. Thank you very much. So this is the first of the updates on, we've got financial services, mining, and textiles and apparel. And with any luck, we won't be too far behind time at the end of this. But please carry on. Please, Claire, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Judy, and hello to everybody. It's great to be presenting to you both offline and to those who join us virtually. My name's Claire Dugan and I'm heading up the Sector Standard Project for Financial Services. Acknowledging that it's been a long day for many of you, so we'll try and keep this short and sweet. Is that working?
Where do we have to point, actually?
Oh, that's a good point here. Thank you.
Yeah.
So before I jump into the actual project, just a quick overview of who has been involved so far. So aside from myself, we have my colleague Victor Dos Santos, who will be the embedded writer and editor on this project. Also a research colleague, Natalia Abril-Bonilla, who has made significant contributions in terms of background research, as well as our team assistant, Camilla Teran, who is assisting with project management. And as you can see, we have some open positions on this project that we're currently recruiting for that will be integral to the implementation of this project. So I'm just aware that we have some new GSSB members with us today, so I think it's important to recap on the high-level objectives of this project. It is a portfolio project, so it will see the development of 3 sector standards for the banking, insurance, and capital markets sectors. As is a main objective of GRI sector standards, it aims to improve the sustainability reporting from organisations in the financial services sectors, making it more consistent and comprehensive. And finally, this project will be led by 3 technical committees, 1 per sector. Yeah. Again, more for the new members here because this was covered in more detail at the GSSB meeting in February, where we approved, or the GSSB approved, the final project proposal. But here you can see the project scope for each sector, that the banking sector standard will include investment banking, consumer finance, credit cards, mortgage lenders, loan services, and payment providers. Insurance will include life, non-life, reinsurance, and insurance intermediaries, such as agents and brokers. And the capital market sector, including asset owners, asset managers, pension funds, and sovereign wealth funds. Just coming now to how we plan to engage and structure the technical committees on this project. Although each standard will be developed by its own dedicated technical committee, we will be bringing all three of these technical committees together at various points in this process through what we're calling a cross-sector exchange. And the cross-sector exchange will primarily be engaged for developing a consistent approach towards impacts arising from investments. And this is obviously important because organisations in all three of these standards undertake investment activities. Additionally, we anticipate there to be further likely common topics across these three sectors, and we're hoping to leverage this sort of cross-sector mechanism to sort of gain efficiencies on the project with regards to these other common topics. The cross-sector exchange has also been included in the terms of reference for technical committees, which was provided to the GSSB for review in February. So that the sort of the commitment to take part in this cross-collaboration has been worked into the terms of reference. In terms of where the engagement is at for these technical committees, so that's been a focus of mine over the last few months. And we have confirmed interest, you could say, or even sort of confirmed applications from a number of organisations who I'll sort of verbally mention now. They include the UN Principles of Responsible Banking, the UN Principles of Sustainable Insurance, the Sustainable Banking and Finance Network, which is hosted by the International Finance Corporation, Shift Project, WWF South Africa, Finance Watch, Sunrise Project, UNI Global Union, UBS, Citi Banamex, Mexican Retail Bank, Van City, Boston Common Asset Management, Swiss Re, International Cooperative and Mutual Insurance Federation, Standard & Poor's, Swiss Stock Exchange, and Sustainalytics. Additionally, we're in ongoing discussions about participation in this project with a few other key stakeholders, including UNPRI, Share Action, Bank of Montreal, Liberty Mutual, State Street, Schroders, Syrah Asset Management, and QBE Insurance from Australia. So that should just give you an idea of the sort of breadth of stakeholders that we are aiming to engage on these technical committees. This is my final slide. So this is just where the project is at right now. We're in the project commencement phase. Ongoing recruitment efforts are underway and aiming to sort of round up that stakeholder engagement, hopefully towards the end of April, with the plan, well, an original plan to submit technical committee recommendations in 2 rounds. However, I want to acknowledge the feedback that was given to the climate project today with regards to this proposal, and that's something that I'm going to take away and consider with regards to this idea. I think there were very valid comments, and it may be that instead it's a single round of technical committee nominations in May. We are planning to commence the meetings in June or September. The considerations behind that change or possible change in timeline is around ensuring we have the right stakeholders on those technical committees, as well as the appropriate internal resourcing for the project, with the aim of a final approval and publication of these standards in the second half of 2025. That is it from me. And any questions?
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Claire. Any questions? Yeah, Evan, thanks.
Asking for a friend, where do stock exchanges fit into this scope? I mean, they were excluded from the category of capital markets. Where do they fit in? Only one, I think only Swiss exchange was mentioned in the possible technical committee participants.
Yeah, so this was also a point of discussion last month at the GSSB meeting, because, and some of you might remember, the initial draft project proposal had stock exchanges included in the scope of the capital markets group, and then based on various pieces of research that we conducted, but also broad stakeholder engagement, we changed the scope of that to exclude stock exchanges from the capital markets group, with, however, the intention to engage with them on a technical committee basis, because recognising sort of the important perspective that they bring to capital markets. So there was some discussion around that last month. We can open that up again if necessary. Do you have further questions about it, even that I can answer?
No, I picked the wrong meeting to skip, I guess.
But I'm happy to talk to you about that also offline if you'd
No,
like.
as long as they're part of the discussion via the technical committee. I would also argue that the UNPRI is a pretty essential component to this, so securing their participation would be a big deal.
I think that's fully recognized. Yeah. Any other questions for Claire? No? Okay. Well, then I think we're moving on to mining, and I think it's Nora who will be talking to us about this one. Thanks, Nora.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nora. Nice to see you all in person, and hopefully everyone can hear me online as well. So many of you know me from previous sector standards projects as well. I've been involved with the coal standard as well as the oil and gas project. So we've been doing a lot of digging in the last few years. Starting with the, sorry, that was, I think we all needed a laugh at this point. So the project team consists of myself as well as Julia, who's currently on the plane to Panama to represent the mining team in a conference in Latin America. And Julia conveniently also conducted the background research, so she transitioned from a research role to the project team and is doing a fantastic job as the senior standards officer. We have also Alex Estrada, who's been the editor in our project from the very early stages. Camilla is helping us with all kinds of logistics. And for some reason, we don't have our technical people here, but Pranati and Laura and Sharon have all been involved with the technical fine-tuning of the standard. So quickly on project objectives, these are shared across all sector standards. So we aim to identify and describe the sector's most significant impacts. So these are encapsulated in these likely material topics. And they are then paired with reporting disclosures that are relevant for the sector. And this is the first project to be developed after the pilot standards, so oil and gas, coal, and agriculture, and fishing. So it is the first time that we're testing out the final template that we've developed within these projects. For the scope of the activities, it covers extraction as well as the primary processing that is very closely associated with extraction. So any further processing stages are excluded from this standard and will be addressed by another sector standard further down the line. Quarrying is included in the scope, and what is excluded is, of course, coal and oil and gas, because they have their own existing sector standards. Supply of specialized goods and services, as well as support activities such as transportation, are also included. We have also decided to exclude pure play commodity trading companies, which are going to be considered later on. For the where we are now, so we're at public exposure phase, which is we've come a long way, and I'll just bring you together to this journey, especially the new members. So we actually have to go back to 2020 when there was a prioritized list of sector standards that was presented to the GSSB, and mining was prioritized as the next project to commence after the pilot projects, due to both its significant impacts as well as the synergies with the other extractives sector standards. Project proposal was approved in mid-2021, and later that year, before the year end, a working group was appointed by the GSSB. We started work only a few months after that, February 2022, and ever since we have had a set of different engagements and tools and consultations with the group to get the input that we need to first put together the topic descriptions and then identify relevant disclosures for reporting. We've so far had 5 full working group meetings and 5 subgroup meetings. And we have also organized an external peer review with experts from the sector to test out the contents prior to exposure. So here you can see the composition of the working group. We have quite a large working group. We wanted to ensure representation from many major commodities. They also cover all dimensions of sustainable development, so we ensure expertise on environmental impacts, social impacts, as well as the economic and governance side of things. For this sector, it's also quite important to ensure that there's alignment and collaboration between different actors in the transparency and responsible business conduct sphere. There are a lot of expectations for companies in this sector, and we want to make sure that we're not reinventing the wheel, but aligning wherever we can, especially in places where we see that there might be sector-specific gaps that our standards don't yet address. So we have representation both in our working group. We had peer review organizations that deal with transparency and responsible business. And we also have quite close collaboration with EFRAG, their mining working group, and then on an organizational level also with OECD and IFRS. Then going into the actual contents of the draft standard as it's out now in the public. So the premise was that it is a high impact sector. We have 25 topics identified as likely to be material for organizations with mining activities. They reflect the sector's major impact. The second key theme or expectation is mine site reporting. So this is something that differs a little bit from oil and gas and from coal. So there is a clear expectation to disaggregate data based on mine sites, and this is present in, if I don't remember wrong, 17 topics. Not fully in all topics, but there may be a part of reporting expectations that contain site-level data. And we fully expect a lot of feedback on this during the public comment. It will increase the extent and granularity of reporting, that is for sure. But so far, the relevance of site-level data on key topics has been identified as something that is essential for this sector. Then the third one is the famous social license to operate. So in practice, there is a lot of emphasis in the draft standard on communities, on engagement, on consultation across the life cycle, and on an ongoing, continuous basis. There's also an expectation to create benefits and long-term development for people who are affected by the sector's activities, so to provide that balance between negative and positive impacts. And then finally, of course, the sector is under a huge spotlight in in terms of its role in the low carbon transition. So as a provider of key minerals for green technologies, battery technologies, as well as renewable energy, there are major concerns that mining, when impacts are not well managed, can end up creating severe environmental and human rights impacts. And that is something that this standard tries to address holistically. And this is the main difference also to the previous extractive sector standards that we have launched, where a lot of emphasis was placed on understanding how these organizations in the oil and gas and coal sectors are transitioning away from these polluting industries to more sustainable business models. Whereas for mining, the expectation is the opposite, is that there will be more need for minerals, so it's not going anywhere. Here on the slide, you can see the 25 likely material topics. I won't go into detail, but I will mention a few because these are new to the GRI system that were not included as such in the previous GRI 11 oil and gas and GRI 12 coal sector standards. So the first new topic is called tailings, and this focuses on the prevention of catastrophic failures of tailings facilities, and tailings being a toxic byproduct of mining activities, processing specifically. And it is generated in vast amounts, and upon failure, they can cause enormous damage to people, environment, infrastructure. And this topic is fully aligned with the global industry standard on tailings management, which was created jointly by ICMM, PRI, and UN Environment Program after the Brumadinho disaster in Brazil 4 years ago. The second new topic is artisanal and small-scale mining, and the approach here is that communities engaged in ASM are an important stakeholder group for large-scale mining organizations. So we're not expecting ASM operators to actually report using the GRI standard, but we do expect organizations, larger organizations, to report on the impacts that occur as a result of interactions with ASM. And these can range from conflict to exacerbated environmental impacts to also negative impacts on ASM communities' livelihoods. So there are also some expectations for reporting on how ASM operators are being engaged by mining organizations, legitimate ASM operators, because of course there's a huge amount of illegal mining, and that goes into very complicated discussions, and also to support informalization, to provide technical assistance where needed, and so on. So we also expect to see quite a lot of feedback on this topic based on the engagements we've had so far. And the final new proposed topic is conflict-affected and high-risk areas, which are, of course, areas where there's a higher risk of human rights violations, such as forced and child labor, sexual violence, and other violations of international humanitarian law. And this topic puts a spotlight on whether a company has made efforts to identify red flags and potential risks when operating or sourcing from these areas. And the topic is grounded on the OECD due diligence guidance for responsible supply chains of minerals from conflict-affected and high-risk areas. And just a couple of words on reporting. The work so far has proved that the working group puts a lot of emphasis on meaningful sector-specific reporting. So some of the most severe impacts from mining activities are addressed by these sector-specific additional recommendations and disclosures. Most of the topics listed here have additional sector disclosures. There are also 6 topics that do not have a dedicated GRI topic standard, and so for these topics, the reporting relies mostly on GRI 3.3 management of material topics, as well as then the additional reporting developed for the project. Then a couple of words on the synergies between sector and topic standards. So this is becoming more and more relevant now that we're simultaneously ramping up topic standards reviews and revision and developing new sector standards. So this will require an additional process to keep the standards aligned and up to date. And in this mining project, we piloted a model where we included the revised draft biodiversity disclosures in the mining exposure draft. So for both the working group as well as the public comment responders to be able to more specifically point out the potential sector-specific gaps. And on the other hand, outcomes from these sector projects are also beneficial to help identify areas for new topic standards development or where there might be need for revisions for topic standards. And from this mining project, we anticipate quite significant inputs on the community topic standards, issues such as engagement or resettlement, free, prior, and informed consent. These are coming up continuously. Critical incident reporting is another one, and anti-corruption. And the team will provide recommendations to the GSSB to topic and universal standards at the end of each sector standards project when they are being approved, the final standard. So as mentioned, we are in the middle of public comment period. Until next month, we will be conducting various engagements around the world. We aim to test whether these topics resonate with the rest of the world and whether the disclosures reflect expectations from stakeholders and whether the reporting proposed is also feasible for companies. So our approach to engaging sector-relevant stakeholders is a mixture of in-person and online engagements. We have so far organized 2 global webinars with around 700 participants. We had an in-person workshop in South Africa with the support of Matthew as well as our regional colleagues from South Africa. There we had a workshop fully focused on civil society and community and labor stakeholders, as well as attended a major mining conference there. In the Americas, we've had sessions in Spanish and Portuguese for both civil society and industry representatives. As mentioned, Julia is now flying to Panama for additional engagements. In North America, our network's colleague Matthew Rusk attended a large mining conference called PDAG in Toronto. And in the next month, we will have several engagements in Asia. So one for ASEAN in English and Bahasa Indonesia, for China in Mandarin, and finally a workshop for India as well. And in addition, we are organizing a workshop or a briefing for Australian industry audiences. And we have an OECD forum at the end of April, so busy month ahead. So, brings me to the next steps and the final slide for today from me. After the public comment closes, we will start analyzing the feedback, figuring out which parts need to be revised, and implementing the changes in the standard. And the team will present the main findings from the public comment to the GSSB in the meeting of June or July. So you will hear more about the response then. And we will bring forward an exposure draft by the end of the year, and hoping to start the rollout activities then, beginning of next year. That's it.
Thank you very much, Noura. Any quick questions? What I want to do after this is have our break, and then we'll come back. We'll talk about textiles and apparel and wind that into the final session on general standards updates. But anything for Nora at the moment about mining? Robin.
I just had a quick question on the couple of previous slides. You had the topics. Right, so topic 1 and 2, and just to confirm I'm not misunderstanding something, with the different moving parts of the sector standards and the review of the topic standards, there's an expectation that the climate change topic standard will encapsulate guidance on both 1 and 2?
I wonder if this is a question for Margarita or for me, but in my understanding, yes. So basically, the GHG emissions topic, that includes disclosures from GRI 305 and 302, so energy and emissions. And the climate adaptation and resilience is only contains the disclosure 201.2, so financial risks and opportunities related to climate change. And then there are a few additional recommendations. So for coal and oil and gas, they were quite broad, the additional recommendations, but for mining it's more
and that'll be swept into Margarita's.
I think it's off.
Sorry, just to add that the inputs from the sector are also going to be the starting point of some of the subgroup discussion I mentioned earlier.
And then, frankly, it all, the process starts again, at that point, because what happens in the topic standards then need to, at some point, go back into the sector standards, and it all kind of, keeps getting better all the time, doesn't it?
Yeah. And just on that last point, so we have anticipated this, and we will bring capacity on the team to also deal with this issue, that there will be this constant circular thing going on that we still have to wrap our heads around.
Nora, very quickly, this primary processing of minerals, and if you see, we excluded the refining and smelting. And if you see the whole sector, from energy point of view, the biggest energy consumption is not in mining, but in the smelting and smelting. So how we are going to complement this missing link through other sector standard, other topic standard?
Well, in terms of energy use, and then we're mostly interested in emissions. Scope 3 emissions disclosure will be a requirement in the sector standard. So there you would look at downstream and upstream emissions, where you would have to consider emissions also from smelting and refining, so downstream from your own operations. But metal processing will be subject to its own sector standard. If I remember correctly, it's also in the priority group 1, so within the first 10 sector standards.
But then refining and primary processing of minerals, they are quite close to each other, primary processing and refining, because refining is just one step before the smelting,
Yeah, our understanding, or our concept of what constitutes the primary processing are the activities that happen on site of the mining operations themselves. So before it gets transported to the next stage. So also the operations that generate tailings and so on.
Okay.
Happy to have a discussion offline as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Nora. I am going to, we're going to have a very short break. 10 minutes, please, if you could be prompt in returning. We are leaving this building at not go straight from this room if you don't want to, and so for the last kind of little bit, I'm going to need to crack the whip to just keep us on track, if that's all right. Please, standards update will be moved to tomorrow. We have We have a small bit of time before lunch tomorrow. Is that not correct, Bastian? Where, yeah. Okay, so yeah, we'll move the remaining matters from the general standards update into 2.4 tomorrow, and hopefully that will all come together then.
And today Kari will be presenting translations and everything related to the download. So that
Okay, all right,
close
fine.
it.
So
And the rest- yeah.
right. So is it the new hire progress and the activity report then that goes into 2.4?
Yeah, the new hire progress, we kind of covered the
We
activity
did
report.
a bit,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so it's the activity report then that goes in. Okay, fine, great. I think we've got our marching orders for the next little bit. Okay, textiles and apparel.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
My name is Alexandra. Hello to everybody that is online. Thank you for joining. I'm going to be speaking about the sector standards project for textiles and apparel. I'll try to be fast and sharp because I know you've all had a long day and we are ahead of schedule, so behind schedule, pardon. So this is the team. I'm not going to present everyone. There's been a big group that has worked on the research that is not here. Of course, also the leadership of Mia and everyone in GRI essentially contributes to every single project. So this is just like the core group that is working on it now, but we are also planning some new hires. So the project schedule, we currently are with an open call for recruitment of the working group. We have decided to extend the deadline for submitting applications a little bit longer due to the request from some regions, some key. Well, we were not having a balanced application, so we decided to postpone it until the 10th of April. We can already see the good result of it because we are receiving more applications, and it's looking good. We are over 100 applications at this moment, but we assume we are getting much more. The first working group meeting is planned around September. Hopefully, we will still be able to engage a little bit before summer in the Northern Hemisphere, but the GSSB can expect a proposal for the working group for us to discuss during the June meeting if all goes according to the plan. But today what I would like to really bring to your attention is something to which we plan to submit a formal proposal, but I would like to pick your brains on it, and which relates with the sector standard scope. So the proposal that was presented and it was approved is quite open to certain specificities in terms of what it will focus on. And that because we have been engaging with a lot of stakeholders and we have been digging some more information, there were certainly two questions that come up to our minds, both in the team and also to our stakeholders. And essentially is which standard will be used by jewelry manufacturers and retailers, and also by the human-made fibers manufacturers. And why these questions? Because the way we have covered is it like textile in some sector classifications includes fibers production, in others doesn't, and the same applies to jewelry. But so we decided to do some more digging and some more research to see what we could come up with. And so essentially, in relation to the jewelry manufacture and retail, it's part of the luxury industry, and the luxury industry is all about fashion. So it's also about clothes, it's also about footwear, accessories, everything that we are covering within the textile sector already. And a good example is these big international groups like the example of LVMH, which in 2021 just acquired Tiffany, which was one of the largest jewelry producers, and of course their business in fashion is huge. It's also part of textiles classifications under some industry classifications. An example is GICS or the TRBC. They have jewelry under textile. And also, it's important to highlight that the luxury sector has a huge financial contribution in the overall fashion scope. So, I mean, with this, having this in mind, we also decided to look, so what are the main sustainability challenges for the jewelry, in the jewelry sector? And we came to the conclusion that some of the challenges are actually in common with the fashion, especially with the fashion component of textile. And examples are the traceability, human rights issues in the labor force and the supply chain, but also aspects which are very important, like packaging and waste. And with regards to these aspects, we thought it makes sense that they are put together, but I'll come to that a little bit later. In consideration with the human-made fibers, so the human-made fibers are the ones that are derived from oil and gas, like polyester, nylon, all those fibers that we are used to see in our sports clothes, but also in very high-tech and professional textiles, but also the ones that have a cellulosic origin, like viscose, that are extracted from forestry and plantations. And what they have in common, these human-made fibers, is that contrary to cotton or linen, that which come almost directly from the crop to the factory that is going to assemble them together in yarns and then fabrics, they have to go through a synthetic industrial processing, which involves chemicals and some particular aspects of pollution and processing. And so, I mean, and what is interesting is that there is still a lot of documentation on the textile sector that focuses on cotton, and a good example is this diagram that is here. When you want to map the supply chain, it's always this diagram about cotton, but the truth is that cotton has been losing its weight on the share of fibers produced, and human-made fibers are just gaining a spectrum in that sense. However, what we also looked at was how industry classification deals with human-made fibers, and all systems in place actually put them within the chemicals industry, and that's because of the specifics of the processing. So considering what we came out with, and before we present a formal proposal in writing, we would like to bring this to your attention and actually make you think about it and even give feedback today or later on. We are also open to it, but it's what we would like to propose is that actually the standard also applies to organizations focused on jewelry manufacturing and retail, but that the human-made fibers production organizations that focus only on that, and they are very specific, that they will have to report under the chemical sector standard, which is part of, it's one of the sector standards that is coming up. So essentially, this was the seed that I wanted to plan with you today, and hopefully, if all goes well, when we submit the new proposal, when we submit the proposal for the working group, we will also submit a revised proposal that clarifies all the scope aspects. Thank you so much.
Alexandria, human-made fiber, there is a term very quite popular, is a technical textile, you know. Technical textile, especially for the sports wear, and you know, it have some environmental features in terms of properties. So how we are going to address it? Is it understood they are part of human-made fiber, or how? What's the thought?
I don't know exactly what you are referring to. Technical textile.
Yes, there is a term technical textile. It's a special type of fiber, basically.
But are they chemically processed as well?
It's a synthetic.
Yeah, so yeah, all synthetics are underneath this human-made fiber concept that is presented here, all synthetic ones, yeah. And they all are classified under the chemical industry, under the sector standardization.
Another thing which is from an environmental point of view is a challenge of the sector, because I worked with all the big brands closely, is the microfiber, you know.
Yeah.
Or the ocean plastic, you know, from oceans to make those fibers, and you know, it's circularity. So please take care of those aspects, because they are already on the stakeholder, radar, how the sector is responding to those issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Robin.
I just have a question, maybe to consult with the Labor representatives, because I'm thinking that, and I may be wrong, that the synthetic side and the cotton and the wool side of these sectors sort of come together at the factory where garments and footwear sort of get made. So I'm just wondering if there are, you know, with our Labor representatives, if I'm assuming that's when, you know, those topics become more significant, and if this has got implications and how we sort of manage that guidance between different sectors, standards and different topics.
Thank you. That's a very pertinent comment, and indeed the focus of the sector, the human rights and all the labor challenges are very focused on from the garment production onwards. The discussion is never around the primary materials or these type of processing, but of course these may become a topic of debate and discussion in the working group as well, and we may have to do changes again or adapt according to the feedback that we receive. But it's a very pertinent comment. Thanks.
So just to be clear, the human-made fibres that are in the chemical industry, they will transition to this sector at the point of view of garment manufacturing. So they'll be covered in this sector standard.
Precisely.
From that point. Okay. And the other question is really just for a point of information. You talked about market share. Have we reached a point where the majority of fibres are synthetic?
I don't think so, but polyester is really gaining traction there. So I don't have the answer for you, but I do think the reason is, in terms of amounts, that is true, but because they are cheaper, I don't know if that is true for market share, but I can come back on that answer.
Thank you very much. Any others? I mean, maybe just picking up a little bit, I did have a thought that kind of builds on Ganga's point about the microfiber issue. I mean, the fact is that the kind of the chain of the microfiber chain, if you like, extends from the basic production of the raw material, the fiber production, through to, you know, washing machine sort of design and detergent and the wastewater processing, you know, through local authority sort of utility capabilities and whatnot. And the people who are focused on some of these kind of systemic challenges, of which in which the textile and apparels sort of broadly sector plays a big role, but isn't the whole of the kind of you know isn't solely implicated in some of these. They will have some very good insight into this, and I'm wondering if it just is useful to bear in mind that as we kind of develop the drafts and consult with people to make sure that that these contents that are being developed for the GRI standards point to some of these broader external initiatives and the work that's been done outside of the somewhat narrower scope of the sector that we're looking at here, in order to manage expectations, but also make sure everything is well contextualized for that.
Thank you. That's very pertinent. Yeah, but just to add, I think that, I mean, the waste is going to be a very important topic within textile, and the massive piles of waste of clothes that are hanging in the world, some of them are by the shore, like in Ghana, for instance, and I think that there are probably more microplastic deriving from there than from washing machines in certain countries, but also the packaging. Packaging is huge within the fashion industry, and packaging contributes a lot to that as well. But indeed, it's very important to have that holistic approach. So thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And the overlapping circles here are kind of they're big. There are big areas of overlap, but they're not perfect, you know. And kind of you could also say, oh, well, you know, the microfibers are probably I think the biggest contributor to atmospheric plastic particles is tires. You know, and we're not doing that in this sector at all. So it's sort of you can really go down a rabbit hole if you kind of chase each one of these. But yeah, so any other textile and apparels questions? What's the deadline for applications for members to the working group?
10th of April.
10th of April, okay. Very good. Peter.
I should ask a question on the including jewellery. has the jewellery sector itself, or the industry, been amenable to being included in textiles? It's often treated as a separate industry. And I think of the responsible, is there the responsible jewellery council? Yes. And,
Yes, there is.
And certainly the diamond and precious stones industry often regard itself as a separate industry. So what's been their view? And there are, large, but you are correct that in both industries, whether they're regarded as two or one industry, there are large workforce issues and human rights aspects.
Thank you, Peter. I mean, that's a very good question. Actually, I decided to do things the other way around. So they have actually reached out to GRI on something else. They would like to interview some of our staff in relation to sustainable jewelry production and all of that. And I want to engage with them to ask them how do they feel about it, but I wanted to bring it to your attention first. So I did it the other way around. So I have a call scheduled for next week, and I'm going to sound how they feel about it, but I do believe that they feel very much into the fashion and luxury industry. That's how they identify themselves.
In the jewelry, there is a gold standard called RJC, Responsible Jewelry Council, out of London, and they have some system or a management system framework from the smelter until it goes to the consumer, through. So
I believe they even have some standards in place.
yes, there is a standard chain of
good
custody,
ones,
so that can address some of our topic, traceabilities, and especially the conflict mineral coming to the smelter, which is completely unorganized, and especially the way, like India is one of the large producer of semi-finished diamond, for example, and as a countryman, I can see how skillful work it is, but at the same time, how unorganized it is from a global, perspective. So we have to find a middle path, Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent. Well, shall we move on to the general standards update then? And I'm going to turn it over to Kari to talk to us. Welcome, Kari. Nice to see you.
Thank you, Judy. Can everyone hear me? I would like to talk a little bit about what happens after all the content has been developed. So my name is Kari Lundelin. I'm a Senior Publications Manager for Standards, and I would like to talk about the production and publication and the outcomes of the development process, which means basically uploading the standards into the content management system and formatting it. And then we're looking at the publishing side of it, what happens when people start downloading the standards, giving you some of the statistics about engagement with our standards, which we see as an important proxy for the engagements, the downloads themselves. But I would like to start talking a little bit about the statistics that we compile. So if you can go to the next slide, please. We presented these statistics already in January meeting, but it's perhaps worth looking at them again briefly. There were nearly 975,000 downloads of the GRI standards in 2022. And this includes all the standards, the 2016 versions and the revised universal standards, topic standards, 3 sector standards that were published both individually and in aggregate packages. The most downloaded document were the revised universal standards, 88,000 of them altogether. They were followed by the waste topic standard with 42,000 downloads, and emissions 39,000. Now there are 2 main ways how users can access the standards. They can download the standards on the GRI website, and these downloads are indicated by the light blue line at the top. This is, of course, free of charge, but a user needs to register and leave their contact information, at which point they will also have an opportunity to sign up to receive updates and newsletters from GRI. The other way is simply to search for a standard online using a search engine. and depending on how specific the search criteria are, the results may contain a direct link to the PDF document to download. So, so these downloads are indicated by the red line on this slide. The dark blue and purple lines at the bottom of the page represent downloads from a direct link on a third-party website or in a social media posting. And in January, I believe there was a question from a member about these referrers, as they are called, about the social media postings, and maybe I can clarify a little bit further. So these numbers represent the actual act of downloading a PDF file from the server, and the referrers stand for where this download was originally triggered. So in other words, the numbers do not show from where users were coming to our website for downloading. This is actually the blue line is then where the user clicks on the download button on our website, and the red line is when they actually have just clicked on a URL that activates the download file. So the dark blue and the purple lines do not represent visitors to our website from social media. That is not what these statistics show. Can we go to the next slide, please? So here is actually another visual representation of the downloads from January last year to actually yesterday, showing a shift in the types of referrals that we receive. In mid-2022, we started a campaign reminding our users that the approaching effective date for the universal standards was going to be in January 2023. And the campaign directed users directly to come to the GRI website. And as you can see, there is a shift where the blue lines are becoming much more prominent. On the 1st of January, we unpublished all the previous versions of the standards on our website, and we have also started removing those files from our server, which means that these direct links from search engines will no longer be functioning shortly. There are, however, an estimated of 400 such remote data centers which have cached the standards around the world, so there will be a certain delay before we can actually deactivate those servers. And I mean, the 400 is sort of an estimate for just Google search machines. So there will still be some downloads of the previous versions of standards, but as you can see, we have been effective in reducing largely the number of standards that are downloaded directly, and we are directing traffic to our website. So this is basically important also from the perspective of marketing all our other offerings from GRI, academic courses, and that's why the increase in direct downloads, the decrease in direct downloads is something that we are also striving to reach in an organizational perspective. So that's just a little bit about the translation, the downloads before I speak a little bit more about translations. Is there anything other? Do you have any questions regarding the statistics of the downloads at this point? Okay, let's move on to the next slides and talk about translations. So this graph shows the long-term trend in the increase of registered downloads, so those downloads from the GRI website, in terms of the how the share of translations is increasing over time. The GRI standards were launched in 2016. That's the small black box on the left, and the first translations became available in October, in the spring of 2017. The English language downloads are the section in black at the bottom of each bar, and the various colors represent the different languages. We, of course, release translations to facilitate the adoption of the GRI standards. And this is a key strategy in making the GRI standards accessible to organizations worldwide. We have plenty of anecdotal evidence of how translations help organizations implement GRI reporting, even when these organizations release their reports in the English language. For example, we hear that the translation of the content helps the sustainability team in their internal communication and helps the rest of the organization, from the CFO to the owners of data across the organization, understand which data is required, which in turn supports the quality of reporting. So in addition to the authoritative text, which is in English, we currently release authorized translations in 10 other languages. Those are Arabic, French, German, Indonesian, Italian, Japanese, Portuguese, Spanish, and simplified and traditional Chinese. And in 2022, we reached a milestone with the share of translations in downloads exceeding the number of downloads in English. And as we started rolling out the translations for the effective date of the universal standards. In 2022, 52% of the downloads through our website were translations. And in the first months of this year, 2023, the share has already gone up to 64%, of course. Can we go to the next slide, please? Oh, yeah. Well, there's actually the translation bit starting here. Okay, the order. But yes, let's go to the next slides. And the next one, please. So just to introduce you, our translations team, this Alan Broad, Standards Translation Manager, and Marta Babik, team assistant, who are both not here tonight. You may have met Marta last night at the dinner. Next slide, please. So where we are currently rolling out the new translations. So all 10 translations of the revised universal standards have now been released. And we're currently working on translations of GRI 12, the coal sector, and have already published 7 languages: Arabic, Indonesian, French, German, Portuguese, Spanish, and simplified Chinese. Italian is being finalized for publication next month. Japanese will follow in May, and traditional Chinese in June. There have been 4 translations of the agriculture, aquaculture, and fishing sectors standard in French, Indonesian, Portuguese, and Spanish that's been released, and the rest will follow in the next 3 months. And for the next new standards, the biodiversity topic standard and the mining sector standards, we have streamlined the production, and we aim to release all translations, all 10, within 3 to 4 months of the launch of the English standard in 2024. Just a few words about the actual process. We have adapted the publication node of our content management system to support the publication of the 10 languages. And this has taken most of 2022 to achieve. So we use the system to export the source files to the system of the supplier, the translation provider, and import the translation back into our system. Each new language has its own technical challenges, whether it is the length of copy that doesn't fit on the page templates, or when using diacritical marks in Latin alphabet, those need to be accommodated by the system. And the layout changes altogether when we need to adapt or accommodate a non-Latin alphabet. For example, the right-left orientation for the Arabic text. So there are all kinds of challenges technically, which we have now managed, and that's part of the reason why we can be confident in releasing things a little faster. The online publication tool hosts the content in an editable environment, and each time a user requests a download, the system uses the style sheet to generate a PDF file of the active content on demand. So this is also a system that will help us when we start making adapted versions of the adaptations in the sector standards with the new topic standards. So there will be a more dynamic in managing the actual content and standards which this system can accommodate. In the translation process, quality management is very important for us, and we use professional translation agencies that are experienced in technical translation, and have been selected through a procurement process, of course. But all translations are subsequently reviewed by an independent peer review panel of sustainability reporting professionals who are active in the language region in question. And they are asked to make sure not only that the language is accurate, but also reflects the usage in the practice of sustainability reporting, which in many cases means that English terms such as stakeholder, due diligence, or assurance, for instance, is preferred to a more academically correct translation in those languages. So we are making sure that the actual translation is also usable to the local user group. For specialist topics and specific sectors, we also make sure that in addition to experience in using the GRI standards, relevant subject matter expertise is also represented in the translation peer review panels. And finally, we are currently looking into new forms of cooperation as well, the sort of sponsorship and partnership models where partner organizations would make a long-term commitment to keep the standards available and updated in the language in question, but at the same time following our quality assurance process. And we are currently in dialogue for translations into Korean and Turkish, and we are hoping perhaps in the next few months to see whether this will lead to an actual project. So that sort of concludes the information that I wanted to share with you, but if you have any questions, please let me know.
We can only have two microphones open at once here. Yeah, please go ahead, Jeff.
Thank you, Carrie, for the presentation. I assume there's a good reason for this, so I'm more just a matter of curiosity for me. It seemed from the 10 languages that there was no Hindi, Gujarati, or any Asian subcontinent representation. Is English proficiency just really ubiquitous there, or are there too many dialects, or what's the reasoning for that?
Well, we have not excluded any languages for any such reasons. Traditionally, this has been just a question of making an assessment where organizations which have potentially the largest impacts are located and active, and which languages would serve those organizations. So that's the traditional way of looking at it, and our capacity has been geared towards serving those languages. But at the moment, we are looking into these new cooperation models where we can expand this without having to increase our internal capacity dramatically. So there is no judgment made about which language is more represented by more people or any such. It's really about these companies and their potential impacts that has made the original selection.
Thank you.
Other questions for Kari? Peter, yeah.
If we go back to the chart on the column chart on translations, am I correct that in the last year there's been the biggest jumps were in Chinese, both traditional and simplified, and in Portuguese? And are there known reasons for that? You know, that one, the big jump in 2022. The biggest jump seemed to be in Chinese and in Portuguese.
Yeah. Well, the Portuguese jump has to do with just the fact that we launched the Portuguese translation for the first time in 21. So it's sort of the first year that it's been available for the Portuguese community. And the Chinese, there was a very well-attended, very successful launch in the traditional Chinese when the translation became available in October. So some of the other languages are still being rolled out. We finished the revised universal standards 10 languages in January. So that means that the statistics are still not showing it. So the languages that were released earlier in 2022 will have a larger share in this graph. But we only finished that process in January this year, so they are not showing in the statistics yet.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? Well, thank you, Kari. Thank you very much for that. Okay, I think, so as I said, the remaining item from the general standards update will go into the session tomorrow just before lunch. I think just before we close today, I have an item of other business that I would like to raise. That is that I would like to ask my fellow GSSB members to join me in a vote of thanks and appreciation to the legend that is Mia Tadamar, who is going to be leaving the Standards Division very sadly. I'd like to thank her formally in the public domain for being such a fantastic leader and action-oriented doer in the standards division, right from her first projects. I think it was the tax sector tax topic standard was Mia's baptism in fire, if you want to put it that way, and the results speak for themselves. Mia, we're going to miss you. We are very grateful for the work that you've done. We wish you all the best in your future endeavors, and we hope that you will keep in touch.
Thank you very much, Judy, for those comments. Thank you to the GSSB who've really guided my process at GRI and had the foresight to bring tax, the human rights update to the universal and the sector program to the table. So I've just had the privilege of executing your vision. So thank you very much. And I'll continue to listen to the GSSB meetings keenly. So thanks.
Great. Is there any other business that any members would like to raise before we close for the day? No? Okay. Can we just maybe have a quick, double check timings and everything for tomorrow first? We do want to start promptly at 9 because we have at 9:05 we are going to hear from two representatives from the IFRS Foundation, and so we want to be on time to keep that all on track. We will also have later on in the morning we'll have a discussion with representation from the TNFD, Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. We have a discussion about the work program that is hopefully going to be coming together fairly soon. We have EFRAG joining us just after lunch. And then we carry on the discussion about the work program after that, and the usual sort of closeout things. Are there any questions about any of that? I think we are anticipating a relatively civilized close to the meeting tomorrow at just the middle of the afternoon, Amsterdam time. But that hopefully gives us a little bit of time to play with should we need it. But I think we want to keep it as close to the agenda as we can. Any questions about any of that, or any things that people want to make sure are included that we don't already have in the timings? Okay. In that case, I think we'll close the public meeting. We might have a few logistical points for members and for people in the room after closing the public meeting. But I think for now, why don't we do that? We'll close day 1 of this meeting. Thank you all for joining us, and we will